The monster with red glowing eyes and sharp teeth was defeated in battle. Misty Flower's team pierced its head with robust steel. The leader of Misty Flower's team bent down on his knees over the monster, and this time, his metal sword stabbed firmly into the beast. Yunha was the guy's name, and he was the man who lived his whole life for the sake of destroying monsters. He was also a berserk player. The guy was in one of the 8 black dungeons of the world, and no one had ever traveled this far because it was the deepest and darkest place. Yunha fought his battles with the greatest monsters, which could not be defeated by every person, but this guy was persistent. Player Berserk deftly and skillfully wielded his weapon. His eyes reflected all this guy's emotions and feelings for the monsters. The guy tightly clutched the sword in his hand and attacked the monsters several times taller than him. These creatures were not harmless at all. Player Berserk was very focused, because at that moment, he was thinking only about how he could defeat all these creatures. Yunha had fought these monsters at a rather young age. He was only 32, and unfortunately, each time, the guy managed to dodge them more and more difficult. One of the monster's tails was so large that its appearance alone was terrifying, and it also looked terrifying that this tail was completely covered with sharp spikes. The guy did not immediately notice this monster. Still, when he turned his attention to it, he froze from what he had seen and tried to think of his subsequent actions as quickly as possible. The monster was nimbler and faster, launching its attack on Yunhei faster than he expected. So, the beast had every chance to overpower the guy. Player Berserk, despite his not-so-great position, did not despair and tried to launch his attack on the enormous monster. The monster tried to escape from this attack and, with his tail in parallel, destroyed everything around him, leaving only ruins. At the same time, the guy dodged the shards. The monster began to lose hope but did not give up trying to strike the player. Once again, he opened his mouth and lunged at him. Unlike the monster, Yunha was focused and sent the creature to the other side with one deft movement of his sword, using his strength. The guy had no time to recover and cope with one monster, as he saw that he was already approaching another beast that was no smaller in size. The look of that one was also appropriate. The eyes of this creature burned bright red, and just the sight of it could not be tolerated by every person, let alone fight with it. Yunha reacted quickly and lunged with his weapon at the monster. His emotions didn't change. There was still anger and rage on his face. The guy decided to attack the monster with his sword, but the creature could grab the weapon with its jaws while clutching its large teeth tightly together. The monster was endowed with such a powerful jaw that it could bite the guy's sword with just one firm squeeze without causing any damage to itself. Yunha was stunned by what he saw and tried to figure out what to do next because he wouldn't give up. The man tried to cope with his own strength and all the experience he had gained in other battles, but the monster's power was too great. Because the force of the shockwave was so powerful, the Berserk player was thrown off into the distance, but he managed to stay on his feet with great difficulty. The guy from the situation did not give up. On the contrary, he was even more excited by this moment, and tried to attack the monster again and again until he won. The two rivals were frozen against each other, and no one was going to give in to anyone because they were very persistent. The monster couldn't stand it at first, and rushed towards the guy. His eyes were filled with anger, and he was trying to destroy the player with all his strength. Yunha saw the monster's determination, and realized he couldn't delay any longer. He used his strength to use his weapon. The sight from the outside looked very intimidating, and the force of the blows was incredible. But although the guy was much smaller in size, it did not prevent him from attacking. After a short period of time, the player Berserk still managed to make such a powerful attack that the monster had no chance. The guy's sword pierced the monster and sent it to the other world. After defeating the monster, Yunha could finally breathe out and catch his breath, but he didn't plan to stop and would go on. While fighting all these monsters, the guy could not pay attention to what was going on around him, and now what he saw amazed him, because he could not believe that his entire Misty Flower team had been destroyed. Yunha once again looked around and decided that none of this mattered, and he wasn't going to back down from his goals. The guy was even more angry about what had happened. Although he was upset about losing his team, he knew that he would have to deal with it all by himself and destroy the main monster alone. Yunha stuck to his goals and plans, went further, and came to a huge wrought iron wall with an image of some creature on it. The leader of the team of the Misty Flower, though with great difficulty, still managed to boil in front of the battle gate, which the guy was waiting ahead of. He did not know it all. Yunha walked inside the room, trying to find anything, mentally trying to understand, and making a plan for what he should do next. The guy was surrounded by darkness, and although it stirred him from within, he knew he was surely moving in the right direction. He was sure that the most critical monster was definitely here. Although Yunha was looking for the creature he wanted, he still didn't expect the eye of the Darkness Master to appear in front of him in a moment. It was a very terrifying sight. A bright light pierced through the leader of the Mist Flower team, and it wasn't an ordinary light, but an attack on the guy by the main monster itself. Because the force of the blow that belonged to the creature for Yunhei was so powerful that he was thrown a great distance by the shockwave. The berserk player tried to regain consciousness, but it was not easy for him because the attack on him was of the greatest strength. The leader of Team Misty Flower was able to recover a bit and sarcastically laughed as he considered whether this was the end of it, whether he would be defeated, and whether he would still be in this place forever. The guy realized that this monster was strong and humanity was now too weak to fight him. The player thought that going to the other world in this place was not so bad because it was already the deepest level to which no one had yet reached. Yunha thought that he still couldn't believe that a monster had defeated him, but at this moment, a girl was leaning over him, shouting at him not to dare to give up. The guy recognized Li Yuan in this girl and couldn't believe his eyes. She was alive and well, and she was trying to help the guy by using her power. At the place where Yunha was injured by the monster, the girl used her power to heal him and was not going to give up, but she also demanded the same from the guy. The guy didn't understand what Li Yuan was doing, and told her to leave everything as it was and run away immediately because her safety was much more important to him. The girl was very angry with Yunha and told him to stop saying all this immediately because she would not give up and would try her best to help him. Li Yuan realized that the guy's wounds were severe. She thought it was a miracle that he was still holding on, but the girl was still sure that she had to do anything to help him. The girl thought about the miracle, and it dawned on her that she herself should create it. Then Li Yuan would be able to save the leader of the Misty Flower team. The guy woke up, came to his senses, and realized that this was how it ended what he had devoted his whole life to, namely the destruction of monsters. Yunha remembered everything that had happened to him, and had no regrets. If possible, he would again devote his life to it. But he was worried that his partner was all alone. The guy couldn't calm down and stop thinking about it, but he had no choice but to apologize to his partner if he had ever done something wrong. Yunha never liked to get attached to people, but he was worried about the girl. It was because she had just entered adulthood and had been left alone so quickly, but he was grateful to Bakrin for seeing the best in him. Li Yuan didn't stop, and she tried to convey to the guy by shouting that she still wouldn't leave him, even if there was a restriction on her return in time. The girl was sure that she absolutely did not even care about the price that would need to be paid, and at this moment, her hands were clothed with a golden glow. Li Yuan knew for sure that she would save him no matter what, and at this moment, something strange and incomprehensible began to happen near them. A moment later, there was a massive explosion at the place where Yunha and Li Yuan were, and absolutely everything was engulfed in a golden glow. The guy and girl were bent over him, asking for Yunha to look at them if he was already awake, but here, all he saw was a blurry image. After a while, the picture in front of him became more apparent, but the people in front of them were happy that he was awake. In front of this guy and girl lay a baby in its crib, who due to its age could not even talk yet. The people who were apparently the parents of this child were worried that one of them had probably woken him up. Still, the child didn't understand what was going on because he had gone to the other world, and he thought so because Yunha himself was in this child's body. The guy leaning over the crib, pointing at the girl, said to Yunha that it was his mom. Pointing his finger at himself, he said that he was his dad and that dad thought the baby must have woken up to look at him. Yunha reached out his hand and grasped one of his mom's fingers. Even such an action was not the easiest task for him, but he managed. Mom understood what the baby wanted to do. Seeing his actions, she smiled because the baby wanted to hold her hand. Still, the father was not even upset that the baby chose for this action is not him. Yunha, who was in the baby's body, realizing that this was not another world and everything was happening to him, was actually shocked by this conclusion because he could not do anything and could not even move his body normally. He finally realized that he had not gone to the other world and had returned to the time when he was only 1 year old, but he thought it was all unreal because it was impossible to rewind time. The guy remembered the last thing that had happened to him and how Li Yuan had tried to perform a miracle. It was this miracle that the girl had activated at the very end and allowed the impossible to happen. Yunha was no longer surprised that Li Yuan could reverse time after the moment the girl stood on par with the 12 thrones, and the parents continued to be enthralled with their child. The boy scrutinizing his parents at that moment was touched, because he could never imagine that he would be able to see the two of them again. Yunha remembered well that his parents had gone to the other world when he was only 6 years old, and they had been destroyed by monsters. Since then, the boy has despised monsters. After thinking over everything that had happened to him, Yunha realized that he had been given a second chance to make things right, and he vowed to do everything he could to change the future. The boy who was the leader of the Misty Flower team mentally thought it over again, clearly decided for himself that this was how it would be, and clenched his fist. His parents thought this action was cute and wanted to take a picture of it. Yunha was lying on his back, thinking about the fact that he had realized that even though he was able to retain all of his memories, he was just a child now. The boy knew that this meant only one thing, that at the moment, he was utterly helpless, and his whole life now consisted only of the fact that he could only eat and sleep. The leader of Team Misty Flower was very grateful for the possibility that he could breathe again, which meant he could at least roll over, which the kid was trying to do. When Yunha was trying to realize this, a joyful girl stood over him and encouraged him that he would definitely be able to do everything and that he should not stop. Yunha was the name of that crazy girl who was so supportive of the kid. She was his sister, who was 4 years older. The boy realized that his memory of his sister was more vague than that of his parents, but he remembered one moment well and in detail. Yunha remembered a fragment from his life. When they got into a bad situation with their car, the girl repeated to him only one phrase. She will never leave him and will always be with him. The boy remembered well that it was the day the monsters took his family, but Yunha held him tightly and repeated all the exact words. Now, his sister was just happy that her little brother had finally managed to roll over. Yunha had tried to do it not for the first time, but only now had he succeeded. Yunha was very proud that her brother had finally succeeded. She was crazy about her brother Yunha and was happy about all his successes. When Yunhu was 9 months old, even then, mana was everywhere, but even though he didn't have much mana, it was in the air. The guy remembered well that he was always lacking mana, which was why he had such a hard time dealing with monsters. He knew that now, he should definitely take the opportunity to collect it, while his body would allow him to do so. The little one never stayed alone for a long time. It was the same now because his sister, Yunha, approached him and was very curious about what her little brother was doing. Yunha, while trying to gather as much mana as possible, turned his attention to something interesting about his sister. The guy noticed that his sister Yunha was like a sponge infused with an extraordinary amount of mana, and Yunha really thought about it. Yunha well remembered that when an individual accumulated too much energy, it would all end up in pycnosis, which in turn was extremely detrimental to his health. Yunha wanted to help her brother learn how to walk. Still, he thought he should help Yunha learn how to control her mana before anything happened. Yunha was already 4 years old, and he was happy to be able to walk and talk freely. However, he still had a lot to do and was happy to spend more time outdoors. Sister took her brother out for a walk, and this alone lifted the girl's mood because she was still crazy about her brother. Yunha brought her brother Yunha to meet her friends, and the boys were thrilled to see her because they were always happy to see her. Yunha was well aware that, unlike him, his sister was very good at communicating with other people and generally found common ground with everyone in their neighborhood. The boy heard the girl address him, which was already rare because the child himself was not very sociable and more silent. Yunha heard the girl asking him why he came here in the first place, and she didn't like it and didn't really want him there. He explained to the girl he called Drin Minji that he had not come here on his own, but had been brought here by his sister. The girl was even more angry because she had repeatedly warned him not to call her that, and the guy decided it would be better to agree with her. The children on the playground asked a woman what they would play today, and she advised them that because they were outnumbered today, they should play Cossack Bandits. The boy didn't understand why he had to spend time with these kids when he was 32 and 4 years old. Sister Yunhee was so happy to spend all her time with her brother that her smile never left her because the girl was still crazy about him. Yunha wanted to tell her little brother the game rules because he would play Cossack Bandits for the first time. The boy was willing to do much more for his sister's smile. He was very pleased to see her so happy and cheerful. After playing games with the children, they went home and walked along the streets of the city. The sun was shining very brightly at that time. The boy was dissatisfied and resented that after playing Cossack Bandits, his clothes were all in the mud, which his sister laughed quietly at. With a smile, Yunha asked her brother if he had fun and was interested in playing Cossack Bandits. Yunha thought back on his time and realized that obsessing over the cleanliness of his clothes wasn't worth it because it was temporary and not important at all. The boys suddenly heard a sound, and it was the growling of a large and vicious dog that did not cease to gallop. Yunha froze in place, and her face showed how frightened the girl was, while her brother was calm and focused. The boys saw a big, mean dog in a dark alleyway among the houses, growling at them and scaling viciously. The dog's eyes were inflamed, and saliva dripped from his mouth. Then the guys realized that it was a rabid dog. Despite her fear, Yunha was still determined and, with her hand, tried to ward off her little brother. The girl was tense because of her fear, and speaking without stammering was difficult for her. Still, she wanted to tell her brother that everything was all right and thus reassure him. Yunha could no longer contain her emotions. She hugged her brother tightly and said she would always be beside him. The girl was still covering Yunha with herself for fear that the rabid dog might attack at any moment, but then the boy touched her hand. Yunha didn't stand aside anymore and came out behind his sister's back, greatly surprising Yunha. The girl didn't understand what he was going to do. The boy decides for himself that before, he was weak and just trembling in the arms of his sister. But at this moment and in this life, everything is completely different. He remembered his sister telling him that she would always be there for him, and that memory gave him even more confidence. The boy decided to use his mana, and a moment later, his whole body was covered with a blue glow. His sister, who was watching this action, was very surprised. The dog that had been watching the boy intently suddenly pressed its ears to the ground, and it was Yunha who had compelled it to do so. Yunha was very focused and mentally ordered the rabid dog to get out of there and leave him and his sister alone. In a moment, the frenzied dog was already running back into a dark alleyway among the houses. At the same time, the dog whined incessantly. Yunha was still covered in a blue glow. The silhouette of the mad dog was almost invisible, which meant that the boy had succeeded. The boy accomplished all this and fenced himself and his sister away from the evil, rabid dog. Still, it was not all given to him so quickly, and he exhaled in relief when it was all over. Yunha stared at her little brother without blinking, and Yunha thought about how frightened the girl was. The boy tried to reassure his older sister, said he was perfectly fine, and even smiled while looking at Yunha. Yunha pounced on him with a steady stream of questions. She wanted to know how he had done it and if it was his mana, and she demanded that he teach her how. Yunha listened to all these questions and thought it looked touching and reasonably expected of his sister from the outside. The boy couldn't take any more of these endless questions, so he agreed and promised to teach Yunha. Yunha remembered another point he had thought of earlier. He would help his sister in this matter as it was. Yunha heard her brother's positive answer and was wildly excited. She could not contain her emotions, which were all written on her face. The girl took her brother's hand and said that they should have run home a long time ago, or her mom would start to worry about them. Yunha thought about how he always wanted to protect his sister's smile. Then he remembered that before his body regressed, his entire family was destroyed when he was only 6 years old. The boy realized that he must prevent all this at all costs to change the future, and in any case, not allow such a thing to happen. Yunha was determined to achieve his goal and was willing to do absolutely anything for his family to keep his sister's smile. The boys were in the room, and while Yunha was watching his sister, she tried to use her mana to spin the hula. Yunha told her sister that this was not right, and that she needed to put enough power in the right direction to maintain balance. The boy explained to Yunha that she had been born with the gift of preserving large volumes, but unfortunately she had no talent for control. He believed that someday, things would change. Yunha was very angry and determined that this time, she would succeed and be able to spin this hula the way it should be spun. Yunha's hands were embraced by a blue glow as she applied mana, and her eyes were filled with determination at this moment. The girl, with all her anger, directed her mana at the hula, which flew back to the wall. At that moment, Yunha sighed heavily and said that his sister still needed to study and learn. The screen showed a girl with a bouquet in her hands and tears in her eyes, telling her viewers that it was an honor for someone as undeserving as her to receive such a meaningful award. The whole family gathered in the room and watched TV, sitting on the couch. They were all fascinated by what they were broadcasting, except for the boy, who was skeptical about it all. The boy's mom remembered and said that Yunha would turn 6 next year and go to kindergarten. Yunha was sure he didn't need any kindergarten. Still, his mom reminded him of the promise he had made earlier. The boy remembered that his constant whining had made his parents give up on sending him to kindergarten. Still, he promised his mother that he would attend kindergarten when he was 6. Yunha couldn't believe he would be stuck among the noisy children who had been crying for no reason for a long time, and just thinking about it gave him a headache. At that moment, the TV presenter announced that there was only 1 minute left until the end of the current year, and reminded his viewers that today would leave a trace in mankind's history. The speaker asked now to be more attentive to all the TV viewers who were waiting for the year's end. The reporter said that she was with her team at Jeonmei Temple. She said that their ancestors, who were members of the Joseon dynasty, were buried there, and that this was the place where a new chapter in Korean history would begin. Yunha was skeptical of all these words and disagreed with the presenter's words about the new head of the human race. He remembered well that after mankind had discovered mana, people had only been using it constantly. The boy knew very well that people did not take into account the fact that using mana generates monsters. So, in 1,999 years, just before the beginning of the 21st century, there was an incident, namely the end of the world. He couldn't forget that about 30% of the entire population had been lost back then, and those were crazy numbers. The boy remembered what humanity was experiencing at that moment, and he was shaking with fear because people had to get along with the threat of monsters that came out of nowhere. He remembered the moment when all the governments and laws lost their power, and the only power that could win was mana. This created a new hierarchy in the world. The most powerful people and players with powerful mana united into a new force. But the problem was that by the time the situation stabilized, humanity had already suffered great damage because cities had lost contact with each other. Large areas remained in isolation, and their destruction was a matter of time. In Korea, which was already full of despair, a small light was lit, and everyone began living with this hope. A beautiful girl dressed in a gorgeous dress was wholly enveloped by the blue glow and continued to walk majestically. The girl was lovely about this fact, which could be said by anyone in Korea. All people admired this girl because she was beautiful, and if someone had already looked at her, he could not take his gaze from such beauty. The girl's name was Lim Ga-il. She was originally a popular actress, but became the first goddess protector of all of Korea. The girl could stop and dispel the effects of mana, and was also endowed with the gift of white grace. It was decided that all players who defended the altar would become sword defenders of Korea, called the 12 Thrones. The boy knew that the Mana Control Bureau ran the players, but the strongest of them created their own clans. Limgayo was chosen as one of the 12 Thrones because she had the rare gift of stopping monsters and was very influential in Korea. Johan knew that players who became thrones and belonged to clans could use the Bureau's power while also controlling the power of their clan. They did all this so they could have a way to monitor player activity. Great hopes were placed on those defenders of Korea that they would use all their strength. Liga. Il really hoped that the work of the 12 Thrones would bear great fruit for Korea in the future. The girl approached a sphere on a hillock, which was completely enveloped in a blue glow. Liga Il appealed to the gods of earth and heaven, and asked them to give her the strength to protect this country from adversity. The girl in this sphere continued to apply mana, and its glow became brighter and brighter. After breaking through the barrier, the sky above the city was illuminated with a bright blue glow. The anchorwoman continued her live report and told her viewers that right now, a cocoon, a semi-spherical barrier that would keep the mana from raging, was unfolding in front of them, coloring the skies of all of Seoul. Yunha heard the latest news on TV, jumped up from the couch, and ran to the balcony to see for herself. The girl watched everything that was happening carefully and intently from her balcony, while her brother stood behind her. When she finally saw what the girl reporter was talking about, she was delighted. Yunha was not the only one watching everything happening because practically every Seoul citizen was doing the same thing as the girl. Her whole family was already out on the balcony, and not a girl could not keep silent about how beautiful the sky of their city was at night. The boy's father prayed and was very grateful to all the gods that they could finally live peacefully. Mom bowed her head at this point too, and was very grateful to the goddess for everything that had just happened. Not only did the boy's parents do this, but the pattern was very similar in almost every home because the people were all grateful for what they had been given. Yunha decided that she didn't want to be left out either and wanted to pray, which she did. The girl beckoned for her younger brother to express gratitude, but Yunha himself wouldn't do it. Yunha did not understand why all people do it, and most importantly to whom they pray because the boy was sure that there were no gods in this world. The boy thought so because he remembered that the gods were also destroyed when everything ended. In every house, silhouettes were seen in the windows, and they never ceased to watch intently all that was happening in the sky above their city. The boy also looked up at the sky and noticed that the skies above the city were beginning to turn black. At this time, Yunha continued to pray, and the girl asked the gods most of all to let her family live happily. Yunha was touched by what he heard from his sister because the family was his most precious thing. He did not hold back any longer and began to pray himself. He wanted most of all for his family that they and he would be happy in this life. The boy Yunhe was 6 years old, and the incident that had taken his entire family was getting sadly closer. The boy's parents sent Yunhu to a kindergarten called Do-an, which means evergreen pine trees, as promised when he was 6 years old. Teacher Tayo asked all the children for attention and silence, because he told them a new friend was joining them today. The cheerful teacher Tayo asked the boy if he would like to introduce himself to his new friends. The kindergarten boy only said his name was Yunha, and he was 6 years old, so he thought that was enough. Yunha, already at the very end, looked at all the children who were sitting in front of him and added only that it was a pleasure to meet them. Tayo's teacher delicately told the boy that it was very short and that Yunha might want to add something else because the teacher was sure the children wanted to be friends with the boy. Yunha didn't think he needed children as friends, and as soon as he said that, he heard the voice of someone he hadn't expected. A girl sitting among the other children indignantly asked what Yunha was doing in this kindergarten group. Yunha recognized his acquaintance with the girl who was talking. She was the same Drin Minji, and the boy wasn't too happy that she was in this group. The girl could no longer contain her emotions and jumped up indignantly, saying she had already asked him not to call her that. Teacher Tayo tried to reassure the children that they would still have free time before lunch and asked them to be more friendly to Yukna. The children apparently missed the teacher's words and request and rushed to the surprised and frozen boy together. Yuna could hear the children's questions from all sides, such as where he lived, whether he wanted to play his mother's daughter, or whether he knew how to add and subtract. The teacher looked at them and thought everything would be all right. Yuna could barely escape the endless stream of questions. Once again, he was convinced he didn't enjoy contact with other children. The boy came across a children's book corner. He decided that although these books were for babies, they were an opportunity to pass the time in silence. In the children's library, a girl with a red bow in her hair was already sitting at the table, watching the boy who had just arrived in surprise. Yuna, however, did not notice anything or anyone around him and continued to sit and flip through the children's books he had picked up earlier. The girl who saw him still froze and did not move. She only watched her new neighbor with her big eyes. Looking at her new neighbor, the girl did not even notice that the guests came to her from behind until they addressed her personally. The boy, Cho Yunhuk, was with two of his companions and sarcastically asked the girl if she was reading again. He didn't understand what everyone found in those books. Yunhuk wanted to know from young Hayan, the girl's name, why she always sits here alone. Probably because she has no friends. Hayan recognized this boy as not her best friend, and wanted to ask him to leave her alone and not touch her. But before Hayan could even say a word, Yunhuk brazenly ripped the red ribbon off her head and said it was improper to wear such ribbons. Hayan tried to convince the boy to give her back her ribbon because she got it from her dad, but Yunhuk wouldn't do it because he just didn't want to. The guy suggested that the girl try to take the ribbon from them and throw it at one or the other. Hayan asked the boys to return her red ribbon because it was precious. Yunhuk wasn't going to give anything back, so in response to the girl's request, he just showed his tongue and started teasing her. The boys continued teasing Hayan when suddenly they heard from a strange boy sitting at the table that they were being childish. They all began to watch the stranger intently, but only Yunha himself continued to sit still, looking bored. Yunhuk couldn't stand it and turned to Jung to see what he had told them. Yunha could no longer remain silent on the sidelines, so he stood up from the table. He came close to Yunhuk and repeated, looking him in the eye, that he said he was acting like a kid and didn't think it was all that much fun. Yunhuk wasn't endowed with any patience, so without a second thought, he insulted Yunhu and then threw himself at him. Yunha was able to evade this attack without much difficulty. Still, Yunhuk himself was unable to stand on his own feet. During all of this, the boy had managed to snatch the red ribbon from his attacker, and now Yunha was scrutinizing it. Yunha walked over to the girl and returned the ribbon that started this conflict. He advised Hayan not to let anyone take that ribbon from her next time. Yunhuk tried to shout at him and said he wouldn't let it go, but Yunha wasn't afraid of those words because they were spoken by a 6-year-old child. The boy promised Yuni that he would definitely get to him next time. Hayan touched the sleeve of the boy who had helped her so much and wanted to say something to him, but she was too shy. Gaining courage, the girl sincerely thanked her savior for giving her back her red ribbon. Yunha noticed that Minji and that boy Yunhuk had much more mana than the average person, and none of the other kids stood out anymore. He watched all the children closely, but only this girl, Yang Hayan, was not like anyone else. Hayan stood and watched her savior admiringly, clutching her red ribbon tightly to her. At the same time, her entire body was engulfed in the blue glow of her mana. The girl had much mana, perhaps even more than his sister. The boy noticed that she was very skilled at controlling it, so the mana around it was concentrated and not dispersed. Such a child would be one of the 12 thrones, or at least their apprentice. Yunha looked at the girl carefully and realized that he had never heard her name before the regression. Even if she didn't become a player, she would definitely become popular because of so much mana inside her. He couldn't fully explain his actions and reasons, so he extended his hand and offered to make Yang Hayan friends with him. The girl apparently did not fully understand what was going on and answered him with her consent. Yunha knew that mana was a great power in this world, and so looking at the girl's potential, he knew very well that it would be good to stay close to her. Hayan and Yunha solidified their emerging friendship with a firm handshake. The girl was happy about this turn of events, and the guy suggested they become very good friends. After a busy day at kindergarten, Yunha returned to his home and was glad he did. The boy's mom was happy about such a gift. She immediately pinned it to her sweater, remembering to thank Yunhu. Yunha realized that his mom was referring to the paper carnation he had made in kindergarten, which she had taken from his backpack herself. The mom also remembered to thank her daughter Yunha, who said she thought it was even better than the actual carnation. Yunha noticed the gift from his sister and decided that if this was also a carnation, then Yunha was evil at it. The sister took the carnation in her hands and said that here she had another one, and it belonged to her brother, to which Yunha replied in agreement. Mom turned to her son with mortification as she realized that Yunha turned out to have made as many as 3 carnations. Apparently one of them was for Yunha. Yunha was in a very awkward situation and didn't know what to say. At this moment, his sister was looking at him with adoration. The boy sadly bowed his head and informed his family that he had made another carnation for his grandmother. He remembered that they used to put these carnations together at school even before the regression when Parents' Day came up. Even though his parents were long gone, he was made to do them with everyone in the class. Those carnations were at the bottom of his backpack, and his grandmother would find them every time she packed him for school and put them on the nightstand in the hallway. However, he never gave them to her directly on any of the holidays. He thought that when he gave them to her, he would immediately lose his longing for his family and anger at the monsters. The boy did not show his gratitude until his grandmother went to the other world, but he will do things differently in this life. On May 4th, the government decided to open the Forbidden Road so that citizens could unite with their families in other cities in time for Family Month. The government has hired many players to prepare for monsters on the roads. But because of the Kraken's sudden appearance, many people were destroyed, and on their way to his grandmother's house, his family was caught by the monster and sent to the other world. Dad suggested that the whole family see Grandma because the vacation started tomorrow and there was free time. While the family discussed this moment, Yuna became silent and tried to decide what to do next. Yunha knew precisely one thing. He must stop at all costs and save his family. The whole family gathered in one room and discussed Dad's suggestion that they go to Grandma's. Yunha knew well that they had only one grandmother. Since his dad was an orphan, he only had a grandmother on his mom's side. The boy remembered that before his return and after his family had been destroyed, he had been raised by his grandmother. She supported him when he was unhappy or if he failed, but then his grandmother had gone to the other world. Dad explained that going out of town used to be dangerous, but this year it should be safer after the government takes over the roads. Yunha turned to his parents and wanted to ask them to go to his grandmother's house another time. The parents could not understand their son's request and why he was refusing now because the government had already taken care of everything. The mother appealed to the boy that if he made a carnation for his grandmother in kindergarten, it meant that he would really like to see her. Yunha agreed with his mother's words and missed his grandmother very much, but he didn't want to go on that day and suggested that the trip be postponed. The boy understood perfectly well that he was only a child and that his words meant nothing, so he had to behave like a child in order not to be suspected by his parents. Yunha shouted that after all it would be Children's Day soon, and he would really like to go to the amusement park to ride the Viking, especially since it was not far from their house. When Yunha heard what her little brother wanted, she was happy to support him and said she also wanted to ride a Viking. Dad reflected that none of his children had been to an amusement park yet because of a period of excellent monster activity. Yunhee's father still decided that this factor should definitely be fixed, and they would all go to that park together tomorrow. Mom wanted to make her family something delicious for dinner and asked them what they would like. Without much thought, Yunha asked her mom to make her some nuggets and a sandwich. The boy thought that since he could not stand in the way of the Kraken, he could stand in the way of his parents coming to him, and this could change the future. Mom received an unexpected call on her phone, and her face became very concerned. With disbelief, she again questioned whoever was on the phone with her about whether this was about her grandmother. Mom thanked whoever called her, and finally asked her to care for Grandma. The whole family was excited and worried because it was about their beloved grandmother, and they did not know what happened to her. Yunhee's mom told everyone that Grandma suddenly felt sick and fainted because of it. Yunha was getting angry because it couldn't be like this. Before the regression, everything had been fine with his grandmother until he entered the Players' Academy. My mom really hoped that my grandmother was okay and nothing serious, but she was very worried and could not go to her now. Dad was worried too, so he decided to go with her to make sure everything was okay. Dad informed everyone that no one could go to the amusement park at this hour, so tomorrow, as soon as roadside security was prepared, they would all go together to check on Grandma. Mom was now starting to worry about her son. She didn't want him upset because they had already promised him. She knew that the boy really wanted to go to the amusement park, so she offered to go for sure, but some other time. Yunha thought that his grandmother was hurt because he tried to change the future, and he was worried that if he tried to do anything else, who knows what else might happen. There was no way he could prevent his family from meeting the Kraken, and if he did, nothing would be different. The boy considered that there was only one difference, himself, because now he was completely different. Yunha had begun to accumulate mana since childhood, and he still had battle experience from his past life. The boy agreed with his mother that they would go to the amusement park again. Yunha turned to his family and said they would go to his grandmother's house if nothing could be done. The boy had determined that if he could not prevent his family from meeting the Kraken, he would fight the monster. Yunha wouldn't give up and was willing to do anything for his family. The Bureau of Mana Control categorized all monsters based on their threat level. Class 9 included those that polluted the environment or spread disease, and Class 8 included monsters that physically threatened everyday life. The 7th class is those who commit robberies. The 6th class includes monsters who terrorize city districts alone or in groups. The 5th class consisted of those who committed terror alone or in groups and had equal strength. The 4th class are monsters leading hordes from the others, and they enslave people and threaten their well-being. Class 3 threatened the integrity of an entire government and had a disaster-level threat. The 2nd class included monsters equivalent to a catastrophe, and the remaining 1st class included those that threatened the existence of all mankind. The Kraken belonged to the 3rd class. Yunha recalled that even before his regression around the time he entered the Kraken Academy, the Krakens were relegated to the 4th grade because of the players' excellent efficiency. The dispersed players of a particular class or rank were too weak to fight the Kraken. The boy knew he could not defeat this monster alone. Only one possibility existed. He knew he needed to wait for the 12 thrones to make it through. Yunha realized that all he could do to help was to buy as much time as possible. The boy was preparing for the trip, and reasoned that the weapons a child might have are scissors and a box cutter, and that's it. A kitchen knife would be nice, but Mom would notice if it went missing. Yunha thought that even such a flimsy weapon, if he endowed it with mana, could do some damage to the monster. His older sister peeked into the boy's room to see if he was ready to go. Yunha informed Yunha that they were packed and ready to go to Grandma's and were only waiting for him. The boy put all his weapons for battle into his backpack and said he was ready too. The city's roads were full of cars, all because the government had installed extra security. Yunhe's whole family was in all this traffic. They were traveling to check on their grandmother. The mother turned to her son and advised him to get some rest and sleep because they had a long road ahead. Yunha was fine and informed his mom about it, but his older sister was already sleeping on his shoulder. The boy remembered that the Kraken had appeared on Sanson Bridge just as they crossed the middle. Still, his family had already passed the middle, and Yunha didn't understand why it hadn't shown up yet. Yunha assumed that the Kraken still hadn't shown up yet because something else had changed in the future. The boy really hoped they would be able to at least just make it across that bridge. Moments later, there was a massive explosion on the Sanson Bridge, and everything was engulfed in flames. The boy's dad froze in place, and his gaze was disheartened by what he saw. Yunha clung tightly to her little brother and was frightened, but the boy realized that fate could not be changed. The boy thought this fate was like laughing at his desperate desire to change everything. Yunha finally saw someone who belonged to the third class and was a disaster-level monster and a Kraken. The Kraken's giant tentacles destroyed everything in their path and spared no one. The Kraken, appearing on the bridge with its tentacles, demolished all the cars, turning them into pieces of metal. People got out of their cars and ran wherever they could to escape and survive. Everyone didn't understand where the players who were supposed to guard the road were at this difficult moment. The players finally showed up and rushed to the very epicenter of the disaster, and intended to provide protection for all people. One of the players suddenly heard a strange noise above his head, and what he saw horrified him. The giant tentacle collapsed after a moment and destroyed everything underneath it. The family was sitting in the car, watching all the horror that was happening in front of them, and they were very scared. Dad decided that they couldn't stay in the car any longer and had to get out, but because of the chaos outside, they all had to be extremely careful. He wanted to convey to his children that if they moved slowly, they could safely escape. Yunha, who heard all this, disagreed with his father's opinion. However, his reasoning was not very interesting since he was still a child. Mom appealed to her children that they should do everything as Dad told them to get out of the car and not worry about anything because the players would protect them. The whole family, sticking to their head of household's plan, got out where the absolute disaster was happening. Yunha saw his older sister stumble to the ground, and the boy was terrified of her. The girl suddenly realized she couldn't get up because she hurt her leg. Yunha tried to pull herself together with all her strength, because she had to get up and move on, and staying in one place would put her in great danger. Daddy saw what had happened to his daughter and decided to help her. He told her not to worry about anything. He would carry her in his arms. He turned to his son and asked whether he was all right and would be able to move on to 100. The boy replied that he was perfectly fine. The player notices the family and tells them to follow him. He will then show them a place to evacuate the people. Yunha did as he was told and saw that the players were not collected and panicked because a third-class monster had appeared. Still, the veteran players adapted quicker to the situation and began to evacuate people. The boy knew that the Kraken was not their only problem, and they should definitely try to cross the bridge. The player who accompanied him and the boy's entire family to the evacuation site was suddenly attacked and was unable to repel the attack. With Yunha in his arms, Dad was shocked by what he saw in front of him and didn't understand what they should do now and how he could keep his family safe. They saw ahead the paws of one of the monsters with very sharp claws. Yunha, recognizing these monsters, was very upset that they didn't make it out in time to be in a safe place. They were 7th grade monsters that the players within their circle called divers. These monsters had an intimidating appearance, and their entire mouth was full of sharp and dangerous fangs for humans. Players fought these 7th grade monsters as best they could, and tried to save as many people as they could at any cost. One of the players found a girl who had suffered from the monster's clutches, and this guy was trying to find someone near them with healing magic. The woman was already running to their aid because she could help the girl. The player saw that the woman with healing magic was unable to reach them because she was attacked by monsters, who were everywhere. A family that was still trying to find where the evacuation for people was taking place and watching all the horror that was going on. Dad tried to reassure his children, telling them to trust him and be sure that he would protect them no matter what happened. He could no longer contain his emotions and shouted loudly for them to run immediately and not look back in any way. No one dared heed the words of the head of their family. They ran as fast as they could, and none of them looked back. At this time, the Kraken continued to rampage and used its tentacles to destroy everything around it. The monster, by his actions, created absolute chaos and disaster, and a vast number of people suffered from his clutches. Yunha saw what was happening, and the boy was seized by a wild rage. The boy tried to shout to his father and tell him what they were doing now was dangerous. Many cars had already turned into piles of metal, and people were trying to escape who could. The shockwave sent one of the cars flying off and colliding with the truck. This collision caused a massive explosion, engulfing the entire area in flames. Yunha and his family were on a small hill and watched in horror as the fire enveloped everything. With Yunha in his arms, Daddy was trying to figure out what they should do next, and he was trying his best to stay calm so his kids wouldn't worry. The boy had heard that the players did not know where their reinforcements were, even though they had been here for a short time. They could not cope on their own and were worried that the roads were on fire. Yunha realized one thing. They needed to hold out until the backing of the throne's support. The boy hadn't forgotten that the 12 thrones had arrived 30 minutes behind the Kraken, even before the regression. He realized that it was unlikely that the players would be able to protect anyone if the escape routes were blocked. 12 thrones could do monster divers when they arrive, but they'll all go to the afterlife if no one can handle the Kraken. Yunha dropped his backpack and finally decided to fight because he had been preparing for this from the beginning. The boy was willing to put a lot on the line, but he would not back down and defend his family to the end. He took his weapons out of his backpack, scissors and a clerical knife, and his older sister, who was watching him then, didn't understand what he was going to do. Yunha turned to his parents and asked them not to go anywhere until help arrived. Dad looked at his son and was perplexed at what he was even doing and saying. Yunha, as if he had not heard his father's question at all, continued to tell them that the players were repelling the monster's attacks. The boy also said that Yunha could protect them from trouble if anything happened. Yunha explained that besides himself, only Yunha could control mana here, and he had faith in his older sister. Yunha opened her already large eyes to listen carefully to her brother and couldn't believe it. The girl tried to stop Yunhu, but it was too late. He had run into the epicenter of the battle. The boy was determined and confident in his actions. At the same time, he ran and tightly clutched his weapon, a clerical knife. Yunha ran hard to meet his opponent, the third-class monster Kraken himself. The boy applied mana, and his feet began to light up with a bright blue glow. He decided to use the Sky Step skill. Yunha was so concentrated that drops of sweat appeared on his face, but he wouldn't give up on his scheme. The boy had often used the mobility skill before regression, but this was the first time he had used it in this body, and it was a bit hard for him. Yunhai realized that no matter how hard it was for him, he could reach the Kraken instantly, thanks to the Heaven Step skill. The boy made a great leap, and, in a moment, was in the very epicenter of the battle. People fleetingly turned their attention to someone speeding past them. The players noticed the boy and could not understand what he was doing and where he was running because it was dangerous. The monsters called divers heard a strange sound, and all their attention turned to the boy. Yunha ran straight to meet these monsters while applying complete mana envelopment. The boy was jumping from one car roof to another at high speed, and the divers were already rushing to meet him. Yunha, thanks to his mana, could quite quickly and deftly deal with these monsters trying to attack him. The boy did not pity or spare any of them. He was determined and thought he only needed to protect his family. Yunha destroyed one diver with his clerical knife as another monster was already trying to pounce on him from above. The boy could handle both one monster and another without sparing anyone. Yunha realized he needed to gather all his strength and be careful. The boy actively used his clerical knife as a weapon against the divers. The beast was strong and not easy to defeat, so in one of its attacks, Yunhu was thrown onto the hood of one of the cars on the road. Yunha could get to his feet, and using mana, he was ready to fight the monsters again. There were many divers, and they surrounded the boy from all sides, blocking all his paths. The boy gathered all his strength and planned to attack the monsters again and win at any cost. Yunha saw memories of his past life in which he fought monsters time after time and never retreated. The boy remembered all the monsters and different classes and levels that had ever been in his path. Yunha was still fighting the divers and was already having more success with those attacks. The boy noticed that skills from his past life began to return to him, and he could remember his feelings when he destroyed the monsters. Yunha felt he was once again becoming someone who could defeat and overpower anyone who would get in his way. He had a second wind, and without a second thought, he threw himself at the monsters because his family's safety was at stake. The boy had gotten into the excitement, and was already more confident in his abilities and capabilities than before. He was distracted by his thoughts and musings, and overlooked one of the monsters lurking under the car while the boy was on the roof. The diver wanted to attack the boy, but he failed, was defeated, and went to the other side of the world. Yunha didn't have time to deal with one monster. Still, a moment later, another monster attacked him, hoping for the effect of surprise. The monster failed to achieve its goal, and recovered to the other world following the past monster. The boy fought vigorously, and in one attack, lost his weapon because the clerical knife failed and broke into small pieces. Yunha was very sorry for this loss, as this knife had not lasted long. The boy remembered that when he had packed his things, he had brought a pair of scissors and a pocket knife. He decided that enough was enough, and it was time for him to end it all, so he rushed forward. Yunha ran at great speed across the roofs of the cars left behind by the people during this chaos. The boy suddenly began to brake sharply because there was a great danger ahead of him. Yunha saw a Class 3 monster before him, a Kraken with bright red eyes. The boy was forced to fight the monster using only scissors as his weapon. For its attacks, the Kraken used its large tentacles and could destroy everything around it. The monster swung around and struck with one of those tentacles at all the cars left on the road. Yunha barely managed to avoid this blow, and the boy jumped onto one of the tentacles using his mana. The boy tried to escape the situation because he could not give up. He had to protect his family. He broke his scissors into 2 pieces and used them to try his best to stay on the monster. Yunha's size against this monster was inferior, but he had no choice. The boy used his strength and tried time after time with his weapon to harm the Kraken. The monster would not be patient and could easily throw the boy off his body. Yunha could barely survive and noticed that his weapon was already damaged and the single blade of the scissors was already useless. The boy was optimistic and glad he had the other half of the scissor blade intact. Yunha did not despair, but instead moved forward and began attacking the monster again. The boy wanted to repeat his past maneuver and tried to latch onto the Kraken with one blade. The monster was already prepared for this turn of events and took a big swing with one of its tentacles. The large shockwave threw Yunhu a great distance away from the monster, and it was already obvious that his plan had failed. The boy tried with all his might to slow his fall and braked his feet against the pavement. Yunhu was upset and frustrated simultaneously because his mana was about to run out, and he didn't know how to proceed. The boy had been on the bridge all this time fighting monsters, and the Kraken decided to take advantage of this. The monster wanted to demolish the bridge support with its attacks, and then its problem would cease. Yunha saw the whole disaster that was unfolding around him with renewed vigor. Unfortunately, the boy realized that this monster was just as stubborn and persistent. The whole road around the boy was turning into ruins, and it was getting harder and harder for him to resist this asphalt each time. The Kraken did not calm down, but continued to rampage, destroying everything it could reach. Yunha tried his best to hold on and not fall, and kept trying to think of a new plan for his subsequent actions. Everything around had already been destroyed, all the cars, from cars to big trucks. The boy concentrated and tried to summon his remaining mana because he needed it. Yunha gathered his mana and persistence and shouted to the monster that he would now be held accountable for all he had done. He struck a mighty blow with his weapon on the entire road, and as a consequence, everything that was standing on it was thrown upwards by the shockwave. Yunha's actions created a massive explosion as several cars collided with each other. The boy clutched his scissors tightly and had no intention of stopping there. Yunha felt something was wrong with him as his hand suddenly went numb. The boy almost couldn't move because he had used up all his mana during the battle with the Kraken. He was lying on the pavement, almost exhausted, and didn't know what to do now. Yunha was well aware that if he lost consciousness now, everything he tried to do would be all for nothing. All his attempts to destroy the monster and thus save his family were becoming unrealistic. The boy was losing strength by the second, and his vision was already beginning to blur. The outcome was obvious. Suddenly hitting the pavement sharply, he tried to pull himself together and not let it end like this. Even though Yunha was now a 6-year-old child, he was the leader of the Misty Flower team in his previous life, a title that was not given to just anyone. The boy knew only one thing. He had to go all the way, and he had no right to give up. Yunha thought about his parents and his older sister and realized that he really wanted to live and wanted to live this life with his family. The Kraken continued to rage, and its tentacles demolished everything in front of it. The boy saw one of those tentacles of incredible size threatening to descend upon him at any moment. Yunha repeatedly repeated that he would not let the monster destroy him, and he did not know how, but he would definitely stop it. A boy who couldn't find a solution to his problem suddenly felt something. Yunha, who appeared out of nowhere, shouted to the monster not to dare to touch her little brother, but the boy took it all as a miracle. The girl was this miracle, and she hugged her brother tightly. Around them, the boys themselves were enveloped in a golden glow. She used her mana and protected herself and her younger brother Yunhu with a barrier against the monster. The monster divers saw what was happening and froze in amazement, for even they had not expected such a turn of events. Yunha used such a strong barrier that a pillar was encompassed and looked fascinating. The boy thought that everything that was happening was simply impossible. It was something other than an absolute miracle, a gift that allowed him to change the world and its laws. Before the regression, Yunha had only known 4 people with such a gift and ability. Li Yuan was the name of the person who possessed such a gift, and the girl was also his trusted partner. Yunha had thought even earlier when he noticed Yunha had so much mana that his older sister might actually have that gift. Yunha hugged her brother tightly and told him everything would be fine now. The boy was surprised to notice that his wounds were beginning to heal, and he found it hard to believe. Yunha also noticed that the light from his sister was protecting them from the Kraken. The boy began to worry because the use of such a gift never happens without a trace, and those who possess it will have to pay a great price to change the world. Yunha became increasingly worried about his sister and asked the girl if she was all right and if nothing hurt. Yunha smiled, looking at her little brother, and tried to reassure him that she was perfectly fine and only a little tired. After a moment, the girl abruptly lost all her strength from using her gift and lost consciousness. Yunha couldn't resist it, and a slight glow continued to form above her. The boy saw that his sister had very little mana left, but it was enough to keep her alive. Yunha gently placed the girl on the pavement and realized that for her, the price of using the gift was mana itself. The boy decided that what his sister had done was more than enough, but he would have to do the rest himself. Yunha stood in front of the monster and was ready to fight with all his might, so that his sister's actions would not go unchallenged. Kraken watched all this closely, and even the monster was amazed by all that had happened. The boy saw that the monster opened its eyes wide and was glad that apparently even the monster was scared of Yunha. Yunha warned the Kraken not to even expect to get close to his sister. The boy will never allow it and will do everything possible and not possible to do so. Yunha used his mana and set his mind on attacking the monster, but nothing could stop him. The boy applied all his skills and abilities and would go all the way. Thanks to his older sister saving him, Yunha noticed his mana had recovered. The boy was well aware that he could not rout the Kraken. Still, the most important thing was that the future had already changed, and his family was safe. Yunha no longer feared anything. He just had to hold out until the thrones arrived. Before the Kraken appeared, the man was on the Wona Bridge near the main action scene. At the time, the man sitting in the car was so indignant that the rest of the traffic didn't even think to move. He was getting angry at the driver for not driving, but just apparently steering, to which the driver replied that it was because there were a lot of cars on the road. All the streets around Seoul were like that now. The man in the backseat of the car was already thinking that he should leave 12 Thrones because, instead of relaxing on his golden vacation, he was doing something else. He joined up because he wanted to fight shoulder to shoulder with the tough guys, but he had to deal with civilians instead. Suddenly, they saw much mana ahead and were greatly surprised by it. The man sitting in the back seat dialed the phone and immediately asked if he thought it was all up ahead, and the response was that it was. The man on the phone reported that he agreed with the information he had gathered. It was a Class 3 Kraken. The man who heard what class the monster belonged to was very surprised and wary. The driver was listening to his passenger talk about how he could have fun when a monster raged ahead. If people saw this reaction, they would be outraged. The person on the phone said that this was all happening on the Seongsan Bridge and that they couldn't resolve the situation while all those players were there. He was also told that they didn't know the exact damage that had already been done, but they were confident that the man would definitely be able to end all the chaos. The last thing he was told was that he could be picked up on the road soon. The man, or rather the lord of the clan, did not wait for anyone and decided to leave the car on his own. However, he heard the driver ask him what he was going to do. The clan lord explained that it would be easier for him to get to the place he needed on his own, as they would not be able to because of the traffic jams. The man from the car's back seat took out his weapon, a big sword, because it would benefit him shortly. The driver didn't understand how he would walk to the right place, which was at least 2 hours away. The clan lord only laughed at this. He only needed 30 minutes because he was going to use his power. Using his strength, he rushed forward to the epicenter of the events on the bridge. The driver did not expect anything else from him because that man was obsessed with battles and always wanted to fight against the best. The man who was rushing over was the lord of the Blade clan. He was also a fire demon, and his name was Kang Henchal. After half an hour, Henkel was already there, and the first thing that came his way was a monster diver. The demon didn't bother with the monster for long and immediately attacked it with a flaming sword. The man deftly and quickly coped with the first monster, ran onto the bridge, and was surprised to see the magic ahead, which was illuminated with a golden color. Henschel knew there shouldn't be anyone in this place capable of such a thing. The fire demon realized well that all this could only mean one thing, that someone new had appeared. On the bridge, a boy whose hands were wholly enveloped in mana was fighting a third-grade monster. Henkel appeared suddenly and immediately rushed into the epicenter of the battle using his fire skill aimed at the Kraken. Yunha saw the man and finally breathed out a little that he wasn't the only one fighting the monster. The boy recognized the man as one of the 12 Thrones, and it was the fire demon Kang Henchal. The monster's tentacles were engulfed in fire, and the Kraken could no longer offer any resistance. It was not at all easy. The monster, trying to save himself, left the scene of battle, unable to fight back, and hid in the water. The man was endowed with the gift of pyrokinetics, which gave him the ability to freely control fire, hence his nickname. The fire demon looked carefully at those he had come to help, and it was an unconscious girl and a 5-6-year-old boy staring at him intently. Henschel was surprised to see only 2 children, and even more surprised that there was a flow of mana around the girl. He couldn't believe that she was the one doing all this magic. The man concluded that the girl had lost consciousness because she had spent all her mana, and the boy was trying to protect her from the Kraken. The fire demon was curious to see them when they became players because the children were powerful. Henschel saw how wary the boy looked at him, and tried to reassure the boys by telling them not to be afraid and that he wouldn't hurt them. The man looked at the boys again and added to his sentence that he wouldn't touch them, at least now. Yunha looked at the man carefully and didn't trust what he said. Henschel informed them that he had a very different goal at the moment, the Kraken, which he was going to get rid of by any means possible. The fire demon advised the boy to stay away because the monster would soon emerge from the water. The Kraken, which at that moment was at the bottom of the river, was waiting for the right moment to return and fight with renewed vigor. Yunha recalled the moment when he met a fire demon for the first time in his past life. Even then, the boy was wary of the fire demon, and the latter informed him that he had heard of him because of his reputation, but Yunha wanted to know what he wanted from him. Henschel replied that he wanted to ensure the guy was as strong as everyone said he was and offered to fight him to test that. Yunha saw no point in this battle and simply asked the fire demon to get out of his way. Henschel laughed and replied that he didn't want or intend to go anywhere. and that the guy could only get past him if he fought. Yunha stopped being restrained, and getting into a fighting stance, told the fire demon that he would regret it. Henkel reacted instantly and was fully prepared to attack in a moment. The boy hugging his older sister looked at the man, remembering all the moments from his past life related to that one. Yunha remembered when Henschel constantly tried to challenge him to a duel before his return. The boy did not forget that he had never been able to win because he was getting stronger with each battle. Yunha thought he was indeed a monster who was born to fight. The Kraken found the right moment to make itself known, surfaced from the water, and began to attack again. The boys and the man barely stayed on the remaining bridge after the monster tried to attack them. When Henkel saw that the monster had destroyed the column supporting the bridge, he was overcome with rage. The man tried to think over his next plan of action, but seeing the guys, he realized that fighting them while they were here would be hard for him. The fire demon spotted a helicopter in the sky above them from which the silhouette of the Holy Mother could be seen, and it was very timely. The girl in the helicopter shouted that she had asked him many times not to call her that, but she wasn't old and didn't understand what the word mother had to do with it. It was the Holy Mother of the 12 Thrones, named Pak Harem. Harem didn't understand why the fire demon had run all the way to this place on foot if they could get him here by helicopter. The man replied that he needed to get to Seoul urgently, but it wasn't that clear. Harem said reinforcements would be arriving soon, and then they could begin rescuing civilians. But for now, he just needed to focus on the Kraken. The fire demon saw that the girl had applied her buffs for them, but the guy wanted to proudly refuse it, but failed, because Harem was more convincing. Harem informed another man that these guys were on him, and he was responsible for their safety. Yunha gently hugged his sister, but still didn't trust anyone, counting only on himself. The Kraken no longer lurked at the bottom of the river and surfaced fully, revealing itself. Henschel noticed that the monster had finally fully emerged and rushed straight toward it without hesitation while using his mana. The man picked up a lot of speed and jumped off the bridge straight into the water, intending to deal with this monster once and for all. Henschel had already resurfaced from the water in a completely different form because he had used his fire skill, and his entire body was completely engulfed in fire. As Yunha had said before, the man was born to fight, and he even enjoyed it. Henschel stood in front of the third-class monster and planned his subsequent actions. The Kraken did not wait but decided to attack first and used its tentacles. The man's gaze was a little wild, and he had no doubt that he could overpower this monster. Henschel struck the Kraken with his powerful blow, and in a moment the entire monster was engulfed in fire and had no chance of surviving. After being able to send the monster to the other world quite easily, the fire demon began to take on some of its former appearance. Henschel was already completely old and looked satisfied with his accomplished work. Yunha watched intently and was glad that the Kraken had finally been defeated. Harima, who had come down from the landed helicopter, ran to the guys to ensure they were okay. The girl tried calming them down and explained that she would help them now using healing magic. Harima suddenly noticed something that struck her, because the boys had no scratches on them. The girl wondered if it was a miracle and if it was the one that could heal their wounds. Harima found it all astonishing and never thought she would ever be able to witness a miracle in person. The girl wanted to examine the boy and the girl more closely, but she was not allowed to. The boy menacingly informed her not to dare touch his sister and was very convincing in his words. Harima froze in astonishment, feeling threatened, but not understanding how the boy could be threatened like that. The girl was even more curious now and wanted to discover who this boy was. The resulting noise made it impossible for her to hear anything in response, as many helicopters appeared over their heads. Harima saw that it was the rescue squad and decided it would be better to get the boys to the hospital first, and then figure things out. The authorities reported that at 5 o'clock in the evening, a Kraken suddenly attacked the Seongsan Bridge and caused extensive damage. All TV channels reported that rescue operations are still underway, and people are being given the necessary assistance. Yunha listened to all the news reported on TV, but his attention was riveted and focused on his older sister. Yunha was currently in the hospital and was still unconscious but safe. The girl's physician informed her brother that Yunha was severely malnourished due to a lack of mana in her body, but that after she took a mana potion, she would be fine. Yunha was insanely happy that it was finally over and their lives were no longer threatened. The boy was glad that despite everything, he could change the future, despite having no hope for it. Yunha suddenly heard himself being addressed by those he was not ready to see. The boy saw his parents rushing towards him and were very excited. His parents' gaze was so intense that Yunha realized he was about to get it. The boy stood before his parents and dutifully lowered his head, keeping silent. The mom was the first one who couldn't stand the silence and asked her son if he was okay or possibly hurt. Yunha quietly replied that he was fine and uninjured, but his head was still lowered. Mom asked about his sister, and the boy replied that she has little mana, which is why she's sleeping now, but she was recently given a potion. Hearing his son's answer, the family head breathed a sigh of relief that his children were okay after all. Dad calmed down and wanted to know why Yunha had disobeyed him and ran away. The boy lowered his head even further and apologized to his parents for disobedience. Yunha didn't understand why he was apologizing to them, even though his family had been saved, which was the best possible outcome. The boy knew he wasn't sorry at all and would do the same thing again. Yunha only noticed that they were not at all worried about the outcome, but they were worried that he had run away from the monster and put himself in great danger. The boy remembered the feeling well, and knew what it was like to lose his family, so he did what he thought was right at the time without asking his parents for their opinion. Yunha now understood what his parents were going through, so he apologized to them more sincerely and said that he understood how wrong he was and that it would not happen again. The boy's mom couldn't take it anymore and held out her arms for him to come to her. Yunha didn't hesitate and rushed to his mother after a moment, hugging her tightly because she was very dear to him. Daddy hugged the two of them and asked the boy not to do that again because they were very worried. Yunha couldn't stand it, so he cried and promised his parents that he would never do that again. He didn't have to fight monsters anymore. He could just be a child, and that's what the boy's parents wanted. The following day, their entire family was still in the hospital after the incident. The family head turned to his son and told him to sit still and wait for them while they went to discharge his older sister. The boy obediently agreed and said he would sit next to Yunha and not go anywhere. Yunha realized that after the events on the bridge, his parents didn't trust him at all, but he hoped it would be over soon. The boy wanted something to occupy himself while his sister was still fast asleep and found something to eat. Yunha devoured what he could find, and he tasted delicious and had a satisfied look. The boy wanted to find something else because he wanted something sweet, perhaps because he had spent a lot of energy yesterday. Yunha suddenly saw a cookie being handed to him, which made the boy very happy. The fire demon, and it was he who sat next to him and handed the boy sweets. The boy had not expected this turn of events, and now he sat looking warily at his unexpected guest. Henkel, noticing the boy's hesitation, decided that maybe he didn't like chocolate chip cookies. The fire demon decided to personally check and make sure, so without asking, he stuffed the boy's mouth with that very same chocolate cookie. Yunha didn't understand what was happening with the man and why he was acting so strangely now. Perhaps he had gone insane, though it was unlikely he was insane as it was. Henschel looked at the boy carefully and suddenly decided to ask him how old he was. The man heard that the boy was only 6 years old and his sister 10, and for a fire demon, they were still children. The fire demon wanted to know the name too, but here was a boy who wouldn't tell him his older sister's name without a good reason. Henkel interrupted the boy and clarified that he did not want to know the girl's name but his own. When the fire demon heard that the boy's name was no Yunha, he suggested that he join the academy and promised to provide him with references from himself. Yunha, listening to the man, was perplexed by the fact that he wanted him to enter the academy, become a player, and when he grew up, fight him. The boy was shocked by this conclusion because the fire demon was already raising people to fight them in the future. Henschel said the boy still had plenty of time to think things over. The man spoke the boy's name again and promised he would be sure to remember it. Henschel left the surprised Yunhu and left the chamber where Harima was waiting for him outside the door. Harima watched as the fire demon was just about to leave and thought this miracle hadn't happened in Korea in a very long time. The man replied that this fact does not bother him at all, and it only matters to him whether those guys are strong, to which the girl was once again convinced that Henkel is obsessed with battles. Henschel replied that this was not true, that he was older than her, and that since the girl was now in the 12 thrones, she needed to control her speech. The man explained his act by saying that if this miracle is as rare as she says it is, then the girl will be attacked by the world's attention the moment they tell them about it. Henschel added that the girl could never return to normal after something like that, and he doubted that was what Harima wanted for Yuna. The man also said that if the girl understood all this, she should just forget about it and suggested that she should go to a cafe with him. Harima heard behind the cafe, already mentally picturing different kinds of sweets and goodies. The fire demon explained that his offer was quite regular and adequate. He just wanted something sweet because he had spent a lot of energy. The next day after the monster attack, the whole family could still visit Grandma. My mom excitedly asked her mom why she was standing outside and not resting in the house since she wasn't feeling well. The grandmother answered that she missed her relatives very much, so she decided to meet them and see her grandchildren. She looked into the car and saw the guys sleeping soundly in the back seat, so she decided to let them rest better. When Yunha woke up, he didn't understand what was going on. He was also very cramped because his sister was sleeping next to him and hugging him tightly. The boy pushed his sister away and didn't realize it was so comfortable for the girl to sleep. Yunha turned his attention to his parents, who were sleeping nearby, especially to his mother, and realized that his sister must have gotten it from her. The boy gently tucked his sister in and still couldn't be happy that she was perfectly fine. Junya, trying to leave the room quietly so as not to wake anyone up, decided to take a little walk. The boy sat alone in the yard of his grandmother's house and thought about what had happened to him during this whole period. He saw he had much more mana now, perhaps because of his gift. Yunha, before his return, was the possessor of the gift of berserk. The more mana he consumed, the stronger he became. But based on the name, it was not unimportant that the more mana spent, the crazier he became. The boy remembered that when he fought the Kraken, his sanity was fine, and if the downside of such a gift was absent, then it was the best gift. Yunha suggested that perhaps he was far from knowing everything about berserkers and their abilities. Suddenly, the grandmother leaned over him and asked why he was still awake. Still, the boy thought about how long the grandmother had been here because he did not even feel her presence. Yunha explained to his grandmother that he had gotten enough sleep in the car and didn't want any more for now. Grandma laughed and told the boy that he would have to sleep a lot if he wanted to become an adult. Yunha, as soon as he got too deep in his thoughts, Grandma was always there. The boy knew his grandmother was waiting for him to start talking, and it didn't matter if it was about feelings or anything. Yunha decided to ask something wholly neutral and asked his grandmother why she was awake. Grandma's answer was very simple and trivial. She doesn't sleep because her grandson Yunha doesn't sleep. The boy realized what he used to want very much, to be near his grandmother, who was no longer a child. The boy's grandmother decided to offer a drink of warm milk, but only Yunha refused. Suddenly, a question was asked from behind if he was sure he didn't want to drink warm milk, and the boy was even more surprised because he hadn't noticed her coming. Mom smiled, pointed to the spread she had brought with her and to the 3 cups of milk on it, and asked her son if he had changed his mind and wanted to drink it already. Yunha wrapped his hands around the cup of warm milk, enjoying its taste, especially the people around him at that moment. The boy's mother explained how scared she was from that call to the grandmother, so the grandmother once again repeated that she was perfectly fine, and generally thought her neighbor sometimes exaggerated too much. She was still very excited when she was informed that Grandma had fainted. Yunha listened carefully to his family's conversation. He heard his grandmother talk about how she had just stumbled and thought she got off very lightly. Grandma reported that she was just distracted, and that's why it happened, but now Mom would really like to know what distracted his grandma so much. The boy's grandmother said that she saw someone when she was walking up the stairs. Grandma preemptively beat Mom to the punch, replied that she was completely sane, and asked her to listen to the rest of the story first. She said that at the top, someone was waving his arms and trying to convince her grandmother not to climb the stairs. The grandmother looked at her grandson carefully and said that when she started to think about it all now, she realized that the person who had said all this was not her but Yunhei. Yunha listened to his grandmother very carefully and thought hard about it all. The boy was sure taking it all as his grandmother's usual fantasy would be wrong. Yunha knew that his whole family would go to another world like his grandfather if something went wrong. The boy suggested that maybe it was his grandfather, but then he was sure his grandmother should have told him earlier. Grandma thought it was all amazing as if it had been all a while ago. She told me that Grandpa told her there was a cute, lonely fawn outside, and he went out to see it. The boy's mom heard this story and remembered a similar situation that happened to her. She began to tell me that she, too, had had a similar dream in which her father had left a deer. The mom abruptly changed the subject and asked the boy what he wanted to be when he grew up. Yunha really thought about his mom's question and went deep into himself in these thoughts. The boy began to imagine and see images of different beings, relentlessly asking him to help and save them. The mom saw the changing emotions on her son's face and asked what was wrong with him. To reassure his mom, Yunha replied that he was fine and didn't know what he wanted to be when he grew up. The boy was asked not to worry about it because it was quite normal if he didn't already know. Grandmother explained that Yunha was still relatively young and did not need to rush into this matter. She advised the boy to live the happy and challenging moments of his life so that he would make friends and even fight with them. Grandmother also added that the boy should study diligently, and one day, she was sure that he would definitely find his vocation. Due to her age, she advised Yunha to live until he found out what he would prefer. Yunha smiled and considered his grandmother's advice to live a happy life. The boy's mom agreed with her grandmother's words because time was on Yunhee's side and he could handle everything. She told her son that his name is Yunha, which means the universe with infinite power. The mom added that she will always be proud of whatever the boy does because he is her son. The grandmother added that she always supported her favorite grandson no matter what happened. Yunha appeared quietly and suddenly and said she would like some warm milk too. The relatives called Yunha to their house since she was already awake, and the girl's grandmother offered warm milk. Yunha suddenly remembered something because of all the recent events. He had completely forgotten about it. The boy gave his grandmother a paper carnation he had specially made for her in kindergarten. Grandma was very pleased and said she would put it on the nightstand in the hallway for everyone to see. The boy knew that if she was putting it close to the entrance, it meant she wanted to show it off, but he was sure Grandma didn't know about it. Yunha thought it didn't matter. He had given her a gift because he wanted it so much. The boy wanted his grandmother to give as many good memories as possible in this life. He was insanely grateful to have her and was glad she had raised him, no matter how hard it was sometimes. The parents called their children to tell them some very important news. Their family would soon be bigger. The boys were eating at their table then, and when they heard their parents' words, they did not immediately realize what they were talking about. Yunha was the first to realize what her parents were talking about and rushed to hug them, happy that she might have another sibling. Her mom confirmed her guess. Yunha sat unmoving at the table and bowed his head low. and his mother began to worry about her son's reaction at this moment. The boy suddenly raised his head, and tears of joy filled his eyes because he was very happy about the news and did not forget to thank his mother for it. Yunha tried to calm down and, sobbing, told his family that this was the best thing that had happened to him after birth, and it was actually the best thing in his life. Seeing his son's reaction to the news, Dad chuckled and said that people might think he was the father. The whole family laughed upon hearing such a joke from their head of household and rejoiced in their family idol. The time came, and one day the boy went to his due in kindergarten again. The girl who ran happily down the hall laughed, shouted that she was already there, and asked if Pochi missed her. The boy was no Yunha. According to the goddess calendar, he was 2 years old in the dream and 7 years old in the ordinary. He imagined himself to be a dog. The girls encircled the boy, stroking his head, thinking they were soothing him. They then asked him why he was crying. They couldn't stop talking about Pochi as a good boy, except that Yunha was trying to convince him that he wasn't crying. One of the girls on the sidelines suddenly didn't keep quiet anymore and said she didn't understand why they thought Pochi was cute. The girl thought it was better to throw this mongrel away. Still, the boy was angry because Minji always provoked him at the first opportunity. She threatened him by telling the teacher everything for insulting her, and then the teacher would punish him. The teacher saw Yunha sleeping soundly and realized that he must have been dreaming. Yunha was already angry because his teacher had thrown him into a cage of dangerous animals while he slept. One of the adults came back and entered the room, diverting the girls' attention from themselves, for they were very excited. Yunha, on the other hand, wanted to take advantage of this moment and tried to sneak out of the room without the girls noticing him. The boy walked into another classroom, and it was not empty. At the desk, Yunha saw Hayan, who was holding a book in her hands. Yunha asked what the girl was reading. She read a book about Sherlock Holmes, and added that she had been obsessed with him lately. The boy remembered and told the girl that in the memoirs about Sherlock Holmes, Sherlock, and Professor Moriarty, he fell from the waterfall and went to the other world. Hayan, hearing all this, stunned, froze, and looked with great surprise at the boy. Yunha realized his mistake, which made the girl look at him so surprised because he had accidentally created a spoiler for this memoir. Hayan was upset because she hadn't even finished reading it. Yunha tried apologizing by telling her he would return in one piece in the next installment of Sherlock Holmes. The girl was even more upset and didn't want to hear it, so she shouted at him to stop talking about it, or she wouldn't be interested in reading anymore. Yunha was sorry, but it was too late. Yunha decided to find another place to rest and went to another room where a group of guys had already gathered and discussed something very heatedly. The boys formed a circle inside of which the two led their duels. One boy was defeated, but indignantly said that everything was not fair, and that his rival would definitely get from him next time. Yunhuk noticed the one he had wanted to get even with for a long time. He said loudly to all the guys that he wanted to find out who was the strongest in their group. He addressed Yunha personally and said that he had come at the right time. The guys started to react very strongly and emotionally to all this because they also now became the strongest in their group, Yunha or Yunhuk. Yunhuk himself thought about what all these guys were watching on TV, so they reacted like this. Yunhuk confidently drew the childish sword he wanted to use in this duel and said menacingly that this city was too small for them. The boy added that everything would be decided here and now and told Yunha to take his weapon, while Yunha sighed heavily and thought about how he was fed up with all this. Yunhuk's friends were very supportive of his comrade, shouting that he was much stronger and wanting him to win with a single blow, but Yunha kept thinking only that they were still children. The comrades did not calm down and continued to shout at Yunhuk to win because they did not like that Yunha was very popular with the girls. Yunha heard his neighbor calling him and thought that she might want to support him, but he was wrong. The girl was only rooting for him to lose, and if you think about it, the boy should not expect anything else from her. He didn't think he needed anyone to support him, but he was still slightly upset. Yunha noticed in the crowd that Hayan was also here and was already happy that she would probably support and cheer for him in this duel. But Hayan did not hold back her emotions, and tears filled her eyes. She shouted very loudly that because of what Yunha had done recently, she no longer liked him and was not going to support him at all. Yunha realized that he was, as always, alone in life. He took his weapon in his hands and was ready for this battle. Yunhuk did not hesitate. Confident in his victory, he attacked to prove to everyone that there was no one stronger than him in their group. The boys held their baby swords as if they were in an actual arena and all far from games. Yunha was able to repel his opponent's attack with his sword without much difficulty, but Yunhuk lost his balance. Yunhuk tried his best to concentrate, but he didn't manage to stay on his feet for long. Catching his sword was much more problematic. The boy could not fight Yunha back, so he fell to his knees and lost his battle weapon. Yunhuk clutched his stomach, but he couldn't and didn't want to believe it because he thought that he could still continue this battle, but only if he could use his closed powers to do so would things be different. The boy couldn't stand on his knees and collapsed on the floor while the boys shouted and cheered for Yunhuk's quick victory. Hearing all these shouts of joy and support for him, Yunha couldn't help but smile and say that it was basically a good fight for him. The guys did not calm down and continued to shout that the boy was very good and strong, and in principle, they did not expect anything else from him. The girls also praised him because they liked how Yunha skillfully played when they all played together in the family. The boys were pushing the boy in the back and saying they thought that if anyone could pull Excalibur, it would only be Yunha. Still, the boy didn't understand what they were talking about. The boys emotionally said that they never thought they could see someone raise Excalibur and believed only in Yunhuk. In contrast, the boy shyly looked at the sword before him and thought he might do it after all. Yunha took hold of Excalibur's hilt and decided that he couldn't refuse and disappoint them since the boys were asking for it. He did so and drew his sword high above him. At that moment, the crowd applauded him wildly, and the guys couldn't help but cheer. The boys were shouting how strong Yunha was and how good he was at pulling out Excalibur. One boy was even starting to feel a little proud of what he had done and shyly asked them to calm down. At this time on the city street, someone's phone was left under a streetlight. There was not a single person around, and such emptiness was alarming. On the phone he had left, the online television news was broadcasting that there was an emergency in the city because the 7th grade goblins were trying to blend in with the crowd in crowded places. While all the news channels reported that if anyone could spot them, the authorities should be notified as soon as possible, the boys were running around on the playground playing games and not suspecting anything. The girls were having fun and happy to catch up with each other, touching and shouting whether they froze or the player melted and could continue the game. Yunha sat in the shade under a tree and watched them all as the boys ran one after another without stopping. The boy wondered if they were getting tired at all because he didn't have the energy for it. The boy decided to take advantage of the silence to accumulate mana, because he needed to use every free second to do so after changing the future. Yunha knew it would be a little while before people would start seeing more power in mana, so it would be better for him to accumulate as much of it as possible. After that incident, the boy was already able to accumulate much more mana than he had before. The boys noticed Yunhuk and turned to him, asking if he had rested enough. They urged him to join their game, shouting that he was now driving. Still, the boy himself never ceased to be amazed at their endurance. The teacher could distract all the kids and turn all the attention to himself, or instead, to the ice cream he had brought, and would give them all. Yunha watched the whole situation as one tried to outrun the other to get to the ice cream and thought about how they were all still kids. The teacher kept handing out ice cream to all the kids and said they should come to him and get it, if someone didn't have it yet. While the teacher handed out ice cream, Yunha and Minji took up the same thing at the same time and looked at each other frozen. The guys started arguing about who they thought had taken the ice cream first, and no one would give in to anyone. The teacher approached them and tried to understand the problem, but Minji tried to argue that Yunha was a guy and had to give in to her, but the boy disagreed. The teacher took the ice cream away from the boys and said what he had told them earlier, so they wouldn't fight with their friends. The teacher decided what he thought was best in this situation and broke their ice cream in half. He gave each of them half a piece and added that this ended their conflict because they could always share. The guys decided unanimously that this outcome did not suit them, so they began to play a game of rock, paper, scissors. The one who wins in the end will get all 2 halves. The teacher tried to calm them down and told them again that they should share and that it was the right thing to do. Hayan suddenly came up behind the teacher and wanted to ask him if he knew where Yunhuk was now. Still, he suggested that perhaps the boy was walking in the garden. Minji was eating half of an ice cream cone and talking in her ear about how she didn't doubt that Yunhuk was out there waving his sword. The only thing she didn't understand was why the boy constantly played by himself and rarely played with the other boys. Yunha was sure that special training should always be done in secret. Still, Minji, after hearing Hayan wanted to find and bring Yunhuk some ice cream, didn't understand why. She thought the boy would come to her if the boy liked it. Hayan still insisted on her own because she was sad that he was out there alone while they were all eating. Minji laughed at Hayan's reasoning and said her big flaw was being too cute. The teacher heard what the girls were talking about and asked if Hayan wanted to bring Yunhuk his ice cream, to which the girl said yes. Minji saw that Hayan was determined and offered to go with her, but the girl replied that there was no need and that she would do it herself. The teacher also announced to the kids that as soon as they were done with the ice cream, they should throw their trash in the designated area. Yunha, while he was sitting and finishing his half of ice cream, heard the guys calling for anyone who wanted to play the freezing game to come over. Minji walked over to the boy and told him to come over too, but Yunha refused and added that he had enough games for the day. The girl wasn't used to backing down and started insisting on her own, saying that if Yunha refused, no one would play with him anymore. The boy wasn't bothered, and Minji said she shouldn't worry about it either. Minji wasn't going anywhere without him, and explained to Yunha that his older sister Yunha had personally asked her to play with him, and she wanted to fulfill that request. Yunha began to think about how nice and caring his older sister was, but Minji interrupted his thoughts and told him to get up immediately. The guys played among themselves who started driving in this game, and that person turned out to be Yunha. Yunhei didn't like this outcome, but there was nowhere to go, so he ran to catch up with Minji. The boy tried his best and wanted to catch up with the girl trying to escape. Yunhei's next target was a boy running with all his might, so he couldn't be caught up. Yunhei still managed to catch up with one, and he was able to touch the boy. According to the rules of this game, he was now frozen and immobile until he was unfrozen. Afterward, Yuna ran towards Minji and quickly reached her to touch her, and shout that she had already melted and could continue the game. Minji didn't even have time to move from her seat before another boy ran up to her and was able to pass the baton. She was now driving what the boy reported to all the other players, but the girl herself was starting to get angry. Minji naturally blamed Yunhu for all of this, and she would direct her anger at him, but she had to catch up with him first. Yunha was already enjoying this game a lot, and with a grin on his face, he asked Minji if she really thought she could catch up with him. The boy suddenly stopped, which gave Minji the opportunity to reach him and tell him that now he was driving, but that was not what bothered the boy at that moment. After a moment, Yuna was completely enveloped in mana and glowing with a bright blue glow, all because of the feeling of annihilation. However, he did not understand how this was possible because he was in kindergarten. What he saw next amazed and surprised him very much. It was a green monster paw with big, sharp claws. Yuna took a closer look and became very angry, not fully believing that all this was happening in a kindergarten. The guys who were playing on the playground at that moment also froze. With rounded eyes, they looked at the one who hovered over them, and most importantly, they did not know what it was. Above them, on the other side of the fence, stood a huge monster with its weapons, and it was a 7th grade goblin. The girl was so scared that she couldn't even move, and all she wanted was for her mom to come to her and take her safely. The 7th grade goblin was already very close to her and blocked everything behind it because of its size. The monster no longer hesitated and decided to attack the girl with his weapon without remorse. At the same moment, mana was released from the hand of one of the guys. The most important thing in this situation was to make it in time and not be too late. With the help of mana released during the mana, the goblin was disarmed and even a little disoriented because he did not expect such a thing. Yunha uses his power to release mana and help the girl escape this attack. The goblin quickly got out of the situation. It shifted his focus to Yunhu, trying to attack him, while the boy dodged and shouted to the monster that he was fed up with them all. Yunha was determined, as always, when it came to monsters. He thought he would try to deal with them quickly and run to help the other guys. The boy and the monster were fighting one-on-one, and each wanted to get even with the other as soon as possible. At this moment, the teacher did not stand aside and tried his best to cope with another monster because he had to provide safety for all the guys. He used the first thing to hand as his weapon, an ordinary broomstick, and tried to shout to Yunhee to stay in one place. The teacher threw his broom at the goblin, and such a picture surprised Yunhu, staggering in one place. In a moment, Yunha was thrown to the teacher's shoulder. They tried to carry him as far away as possible. The teacher was doing the same thing to the girl who was grabbed by the arcing arm, and all the teacher told them to do was hold on as tightly as possible. The teacher tried to save the children, but the goblins did not agree and chased him to destroy them all. The goblin decided to catch up with them as soon as possible, and rushed at them from behind in a leap with his weapon already quite close to the guys. Yuna also decided to help the teacher and himself, and once again applied his power using mana. The boy tried to concentrate, though it was not easy to do so in a hurry, but he did not intend to give up so easily and quickly in front of the monsters. Yuna could still accomplish what he had planned, and thanks to the boy's strength, the monster was pushed as far away from them as possible. The boy breathed a sigh of relief at his success. It was good that the teacher hadn't noticed any manipulation on his part, but he was still running forward to find a place to hide. Yuna had already entered the room on his own feet. Still, the teacher continued to carry the terrified girl, who was even afraid to open her eyes. The teacher, having finally reached a place where they could all take shelter, fell to the floor and began to complain to the kindergarten director while the girl was trying to calm down from the incident she had seen. Despite his fatigue, he still asked the director what had happened to the other children. The woman assured him that all the others had already been evacuated and were in a relatively safe place. Yuna heard the adults talking about how these were actually 7th grade goblins, of which there were 2, and that they had most likely appeared a few days ago. All this information was passed on to the authorities, and now it was necessary to wait for the players, who could sort it all out. The teacher said that he would now go and try to barricade the door with the other teachers. As soon as Minji learned the important information, she shouted to all the adults that they couldn't find Yunhuk and the girl Hayan anywhere. The principal and teacher were shocked and worried about the children. Minji added that she had seen them in the garden recently and that they would get ice cream. Despite his great fear, the teacher decided that he would definitely bring the children back, but the principal doubted it and was sure that he would not succeed. They did not know what they should do now, but they were very worried about the children. Some of the boys heard what their teacher Tayo was going to do, started crying, and asked him to stay with them and not go anywhere. But the rest of the guys started crying because they were worried about what would happen to their friends. and asked teacher Tayo to find them and bring them back. At this time, the boy Yunhuk was grabbed by the monster's paw, while Hayan, standing a little aside, watched them with horror and trembled with fear. Hayan saw that the monster was no longer waiting and was attacking the boy, trying to destroy him. She couldn't stay away, so she summoned her mana and shouted to the monster to stop. The girl was able to use her strength to throw the monsters away from Yunhuk. She rushed to him to see if he was all right, and they also needed to decide what to do next. The second goblin was not as far away from the guys as before and looked at them angrily, wanting revenge for his kin. Hayan helped Yunhuk up. They both looked at the monster and tried their best to think of something to do. Yunhuk realized that standing in one place would only make things worse for them, so he grabbed the girl and told her to run as fast as possible. Hayan still couldn't understand what they should do and asked Yunhuk about it, but he tried to calm the girl's panic and said that the adults would find them and that they needed to hide somewhere before they came. Yunhuk saw a metal hill ahead in the playground and said that they should try to climb it, and then the monster wouldn't be able to get to them. The boy let Hayan go ahead and helped her climb as high as possible and wait for the adults to come to their aid. Yunhuk heard behind him that the goblin was closer than he thought, and told the girl to keep climbing as high as she could, but Hayan realized that he wasn't going to climb with her, and was even more scared. The boy decides to stay downstairs and hold off the monster until the adults arrive, thus trying to protect Hayan from the beast. Hayan tried to dissuade the boy from this idea and to get in immediately. Still, Yunhuk was ready to face the monster with his child's sword firmly in his hands. The boy gathered all his anger and was ready for this battle as never before because he realized that no one else could do it but him. Yunhuk, at this moment, visualized the image of someone he admired and wanted to be like, and it was a fire demon. The boy remembered watching his victory over the Kraken on TV and how amazed he was by it. Yunhuk rejoiced at the fire demon's victory as if it were his own, considered the man a true hero, and wanted to become one as soon as he grew up. The boy took the child's sword more firmly and confidently said he would be a hero like his fire demon idol. The goblin was already furious and wanted only one thing, to deal with Yunhuk as quickly as possible. Yunhuk was trying to concentrate and convince himself that everything was fine. He just needed to remember all his training, but the monster was already approaching the boy and trying to attack. The boy closed his eyes tightly and tried to overcome his fear by instilling confidence in himself that he would succeed and was able to repel one blow of the monster. But the goblin was many times stronger than Yunhuk and could trap him in a corner with no way for him to get out, and the monster was ready to finish the job. Suddenly, another person could not pass by this battle, and on the contrary, was going to take an active part in it and, at the same time, raze the ground with another child's sword. Yunhuk already thought he was going to go to the next world and could not continue looking at the monster, so he closed his eyes tightly with his hands and clamped them shut. Hayan, who was watching everything around her from her hiding place, was very scared, but didn't know how to help her comrade. Yunha, who appeared suddenly but very timely, covered Yunhuk with himself and resolutely rushed towards the monster. Yunhuk heard the boy say that he had done well and froze in surprise. He had not expected to hear such words from someone he had recently fought with, and he wanted to know who was the strongest in their group. Yunha didn't stop at what he said. He looked directly into Yunhuk's eyes and said he thought he was a real man. Yunhuk was even more surprised at what was said and couldn't understand why Yunha was telling him all this now. The monster decided not to stand idly by and rushed at Yunhuk. Still, Yunhuk noticed it all in time and shouted at him to turn around immediately. The goblin's weapon was powerful and very sharp, and if it could reach its target, the man would not be happy. Yunha turned around in time and repelled the monster's attack with his sword, which had mana attached. Yunhuk stood behind him and couldn't believe that Yunha was capable of such a fight, and was so skillful at deflecting and attacking the monster. In the end, Yunha was still able to defeat the 7th grade goblin, after which a turquoise-colored diamond was left lying on the ground. The boy completely recovered. He turned to Yunhuk and smiled, saying that was it, and he could finally catch his breath. Yunhuk didn't hesitate for a second and rushed over to hug his comrade, admiringly saying that he was a real hero to him. Yunha tried to get away from the embrace, but he couldn't because Hayan was rushing towards him and just as delighted by what she saw. The girl began to cry and tell how scared she was, but she was still not going to open her arms. Yunha remembered walking past the room a little earlier and overhearing a conversation about how the guys couldn't be found and didn't know what would happen to them now. The boy decided that he couldn't stay away and went in search of the boys. When he came to the playground with the help of mana, he decided to scan everything in the neighborhood. Yunhuk saw a figure with a considerable mana and recognized it as Hayan, then noticed Yunhuk too and was glad that the guys were okay and both could escape. Yunha relaxed and rejoiced too soon, for he had scanned another figure in the distance. It did not bode well because that monster was approaching where all the others hid. After noticing the monster, the boy decided to kill the goblin approaching the gymnasium and then return to Yunhuk and Hayan. The beast froze and tried to smell those it needed, and the goblin looked very intimidating. Yunha went out to meet him and was going to take this fight because he felt he had a duty to ensure the safety of all the boys and his teacher. As soon as he saw the boy in front of him, the monster instantly rushed at him, wanting to destroy him once and for all. Yunha used his strength, and with the clerical knife in his hand, which served as his weapon, he jumped high up and was able to leap over the monster. The boy engaged his mana and intended to attack the monster with as much force as possible. Yunha was at the monster's back, and the goblin couldn't dodge it, so it was destroyed. After this battle, the boy looked at his weapon and saw that the clerical knife was no longer useful, and that it would be unrealistic to use it. But it was still a great help to him. He threw away his weapon next to the crystal and rushed back to help the guys, thinking that no one should break into the kindergarten like that. As soon as he got to the second monster, he would definitely deal with him. The boy rushed to run as fast as he could, thinking only of making sure the boys could hold out until he came. He tried to send a mental message to Yunhuk and Hayan that he was on his way to them. Yunha came back to reality, where he was still being hugged by the guys who couldn't get over the shock. He decided that it was better to let it be like this, and he would be patient for a while. The boy suddenly saw the teacher Tayo rushing to their aid with a broom in his hand that he was going to use for the battle. He was already shouting to them all, wanting to know immediately if they were all right. Yunha finally calmed down because he realized that everything was over and all the monsters that attacked the kindergarten had been destroyed. So he happily replied to their teacher that everything was fine with them all. After a while, a lot of people gathered on the kindergarten's territory because there were policemen and worried parents who came to pick up their children as soon as they found out what had happened to them. One of the uniformed men was talking to Yunhei, wanting to know personally if he was actually able to destroy the monster. The boy, shy and avoiding a direct answer, began to humor him a little, saying that the goblin was hurt and telling him that he had just disappeared when Yunha struck him with a few blows. The man was puzzled because even if the goblins were in 7th or 8th grade, they were not weak enough to be overcome by a 7-year-old child. He knew well that monsters could only be sent to the other world by destroying their core with a weapon infused with mana or a strong physical attack. The man also started asking the boy for the goblin in the hallway. Yunha continued to look for a way out of the situation, so he answered the man that he was most likely able to destroy the goblin that sent the other one to the other world. After their battle, one of them was very weak, and so the boy managed to deal with him. The boy hoped that such an answer would satisfy the orderly, and there would be no doubts, and in principle he was right. The man behind the podium said that on behalf of Songbook Gu's office, they sincerely apologized to Du in kindergarten for the recent incident. Looking at all those gathered in the hall, the man went on to say that they would try their best to do everything possible for the well-being of this kindergarten. The man moved smoothly to the pleasant and joyous moments and pointed to their hero of the day. No, Yunha received the commendation and was given a certificate for the brave child for his bravery in saving the people from the monster's attack. Everyone in the room applauded wildly for the boy's bravery, especially his comrades and teacher, who admired him. Suddenly, the boy's parents appeared and heard what exactly their son was being rewarded for. They asked threateningly if he had once again done something without thinking, as he had done with the Kraken, and added that they wanted him to write a note of apology. Yunha heard his parents' reaction and was sure he wouldn't get off that quickly now. The reporters asked the boy to smile a little wider so they could get a good picture. After a while, the school directorate decided to organize the festival at Du kindergarten. In this festival, there was a character and a legend that said that a long time ago, there lived a princess, Snow White. Her face was whiter than white, and she was very beautiful. It was Snow White Hayan. The legend was told, and the stage showed that Snow White had a warm heart. In the forest, 7 dwarves live who love her very much. The girl was very sweet and beautiful. The dwarves protected her and shielded her from all troubles. Parents who sat in the audience watched these actions on the stage and admired their children and their play. Yunhuk grabbed his head and ran up to Yunha, whom he had recently considered his captain. He started shouting that he didn't know what to do because he had forgotten his text. Yunha didn't understand why the boy was so panicked since he had only been given one line to learn and sounded out his words for him once more. Yunhuk was happy to have such help and thought that Yunha was a true captain who remembered everything. Still, Yunha thought about how the boy had changed a lot after the situation with the goblins. Yunha remembered how the boy had nicknamed him a warrior. Still, he didn't like it and urged him not to call him that anymore, so they agreed that Yunhuk would call him captain instead of warrior. Yunhuk understood and promised his captain that he would show him how good an actor he could be. On the stage stood the princess in a beautiful dress with her nomami, and someone had already rushed to meet her. The girl who came on stage turned to the princess to look at the red apple in her hand, which looked very appetizing. Princess Snow White took a closer look at this apple and decided it looked beautiful. The dwarves tried to warn the princess not to take anything from the stranger, and were almost sure that the apple was poisoned. One of the dwarves yelled for the princess not to eat that apple. The boy Yunhuk, also on stage, shouted very loudly for her not to dare take it. The guys shouted to the princess all in one voice that she did not touch the apple, and in any case, did not eat it. In this game, they came out perfectly. Their emotions were incredible. The teacher took a microphone in his hands and voiced everything happening on stage for the guests. At this point on the stage, the emotions only heated up more because the dwarves were trying to prove to the princess that she should not eat the apple, and the queen wanted to insist on her own. The parents and relatives of the guys who were watching the scene and everything that happened in it were delighted with such a game of actors. Yunha, still backstage, oversaw Yunhuk and thought the boy was playing like a robot and moving the same way. Tired of waiting and persuading Snow White, the queen threw an apple at her to finally eat it. The girl launched the apple, but it fell into the mouth of the wrong person for whom it was intended, and she got even angrier. One of the guys who played the dwarf did not hold back his emotions and cried because he thought Yunhuk had gone to the other world because the apple had fallen into his mouth. All the other guys froze in shock because the dwarf had eaten the poisoned apple meant for the princess. The teacher continued to comment on all the events happening on the stage and spoke into the microphone for the audience, stating that despite all this, the queen did not give up. He elaborated on the scenario, saying that the queen still made the princess eat the rest of the apple. The girl who played the queen couldn't stand it any longer, so she shoved it into the princess's mouth and told her to finally bite it off. Snow White, with a bitten apple in her hand with horror, said Mom, and the queen running backstage shouted back that she was not her mom but her stepmother, and reminded her that she had already asked her many times not to call her that. Hayan froze in surprise and still held the bitten apple in her hands. Snow White could no longer stand still because her legs suddenly weakened and she fell. The dwarfs carried their comrade, who had accidentally gotten a poisoned apple, off the stage. The teacher carefully watched everything on the stage and walked over to Yunha, putting his arm around his shoulders. He wiped away the tears in his eyes from laughing and told Yunha that he could only rely on him now. The teacher confidently told the boy that they had placed bets on which band would perform best. At this time, Snow White was already lying on the stage with many beautiful white flowers around her. The moment had come that Yunha needed to go on stage and play his part in this play. Hayan, on the other hand, lay motionless in the flowers, her eyes squeezed tightly shut, and the girl still looked very cute in her pretty dress. As soon as Yunha walked onto the stage, he immediately heard the audience whispering in the hall, wondering if he was really the one. Yunha stood beside Snow White, and the whispers from the hall were getting louder and louder. He heard people speculating whether this boy was really able to destroy the monster, and he didn't believe the rumors. But someone said that it was all true, and he was even rewarded by the mayor's office. Some viewers still could not believe it because in front of them was just a child, and how he could do such a thing, people did not understand. Yunha didn't regret anything because those were real monsters who were not afraid to sacrifice people's lives. Still, he was a player, and it was his duty. The boy's thoughts were interrupted by loudly spoken words from the hall, shouting that he was perfect. Yunha didn't understand who was saying that. Yunha was confused and now froze motionless, trying to reach his senses. The girl shouting to the boy about how good he was while actively waving her hands from her seat was his sister, Yunha. Following his sister, his parents began to support the boy. The first one shouted out to his father what a very handsome son he had, and his mother said that she was also there with his younger brother. Yunha heard all the words of his relatives, who tried to support him with all their might and decided he could play his role correctly. The boy blushed, laughed, and told his family they were embarrassing him with their flattering words. Yunha finally overcame his stiffness and confusion and approached the princess. The boy gathered all his courage and exhaled deeply, intending to do what he had to do. Yunha leaned over the princess and spoke his line for the play, which asked how someone so beautiful could exist in this world. Next, the boy in the script was supposed to kiss his Snow White on the forehead, which, in principle, he did. After that kiss, the princess could open her beautiful eyes a little. Yunha gave the girl a hand and helped her to lift herself up, while the boy looked at her very touchingly and tenderly. After this skit, the whole hall burst into applause, and his family was especially happy for their talented Yunhu. Yunha and Hayan bowed low before the entire hall, taking their hands. The guys who were watching this scene backstage could not stand still any longer, so they rushed at the guys with shouts of joy. Yunhei, who could not have expected anything like this, was lifted up in his arms and began to toss him around while shouting at him how good he was. The boy began to worry about his safety because the boys were throwing him very high, and he could fall. The boys still couldn't hold Yunhu, but could catch him with strong, steady hands without letting him fall and hurt himself. His father's hands immediately raved about how good he was on stage, and he was very proud of him. When he heard these words, the boy smiled happily and said that of course he was good because he was his son. While Dad and the boy were laughing, Mom approached them and wanted to ask Yunhee something. She smiled at her son and asked if he had considered what he would do when he grew up. Yunha suddenly thought about it and remembered his mom asking him the same thing last year. The boy remembered drinking warm milk in his grandmother's yard and his mother wondering what he wanted to do when he grew up. With his eyes downcast, the boy did not know the answer to this question. He still did not understand what he wanted to do as a child. But now, as he looked at all of his boys enjoying a well-performed play, he realized one thing. Yunha was sure that he just wanted to be happy and didn't want anyone to stop him from being happy. Now the boy thinks that he has to give his mom an answer to what he wants to be. The boy sitting on his father's shoulders smilingly said that perhaps he would like to become a warrior. Yunha asked his daddy to let him down, which he agreed to because that's what his rising warrior wanted. The mom looked at her son with pride and great love and couldn't help but be overjoyed. The boy was already running to his brothers to celebrate his successful performance. His mother added that he should do as he saw fit and that she would always support him. Yunhuk, seeing Yunha immediately with a smile, rushed to hug and congratulate his friend as captain. After a while, there was no longer a kindergarten building but an elementary school where all the kids went. The principal from the Price, standing behind the podium next to all the teachers, congratulated all the children who entered the elementary school on this beautiful spring day, with the buds blooming. Among all these children was Yunha himself, who was already 8 years old at that time, and according to the goddess's calendar, it was year 3. When Minji saw Yunha standing in the row with everyone else, she was disrespectful because the boy was yawning. She told him about it because, at that moment, the principal was speaking. The boy could not keep silent and replied that he thought she was just as strange. Hayan had already turned to them and informed them that the teacher had asked them to be quiet. Yunhuk couldn't keep quiet anymore, so he told Yuna that he thought there would be many strong children here and wanted to know when his captain would be in charge. Still, Yuna asked him to calm down because he wouldn't do anything. The boy still didn't want to calm down and continued to speculate aloud that Yunha, his boss, must be worried about Yunhuk. While Yunha was tiredly trying to convince his comrade that he wasn't worried about him at all, the headmaster was finishing his speech for the junior high school students. After the principal's speech, all students were assigned to their classrooms for further introductions and instruction. A girl introduced herself in front of the class. She said her name was Kim Minji and she was from Manhwa district. The girl told everyone that she went to do in kindergarten and that she still wanted to play and make friends. She also liked to watch melodramas and listen to music. But listening to her, Yunha did not understand why she had to talk so long. Delicately interrupting Minji, she was told that today they did not have much time for this. She offered to tell the girl about it all the time and said all this class teacher of the first-year boys number 4, Eugenia. Minji had nothing to do but finish his story, sit down at his desk, and make sure to continue another time, to which all the guys exhaled a sigh of relief that they would listen, not now. The teacher asked the next student to introduce himself in front of everyone. Yuna stood up from his desk, ready to fulfill the teacher's request. Unlike Minji, the boy decided to tell his name briefly. His name was No Yunha. He was from Doan's kindergarten, and the last thing he said was that he hoped they would become friends. Teacher Gina, as soon as she realized that this was the end and the boy was not going to tell anything more about himself, began to think about who to ask next to speak and get acquainted with. Gina looked in her journal and selected the next child from the whole list. It was student young Hayan. She also asked the girl to introduce herself. Hayan stood up from her desk, but the girl's head was down low, and it was clearly visible that she was uncomfortable with the whole situation. The girl could not start because she was very shy and embarrassed that the whole class was intently looking at her. She could only say that her name was Yang Hayan, but the girl stopped there and could not continue, no matter how much she wanted to pull herself together and overcome this obstacle inside her. At this moment, Yunha oversaw Hayan and became a little worried for the girl, seeing how difficult it was for her to overcome herself. Still, he hoped that she would definitely be able to cope with everything. Hayan once again tried to pull herself together, but for some reason she remembered an event that had happened earlier. On the porch next to the girl stood a man who introduced himself, saying he was Hayan's dad and was happy to meet his daughter's friends. The kids, who all came to visit Hayan happily and with smiles, said hello to her dad. The girl's dad knew that getting to their house was not easy for the boys, so he promised them that he would cook them a delicious dinner. While they were waiting, he asked them what they wanted to drink. Yunha, meanwhile, was looking at the girl's dad very carefully, and something was bothering the boy. While the boy wondered where he could have seen him, the boys shouted to Hayan's dad about what they wanted to drink. One asked for a chocolate bar, another wanted mango juice, and Hayan told her dad she wanted yogurt. The man promised all the boys that he would bring the drinks they wanted, and turned to Yunhee to see what the boy would like to drink. The boy first asked the man for an espresso, but then came to his senses, smiled, and said he'd better get some banana juice. In front of the guys was set a fancy table on which stood many plates with all sorts of sweets, and the guys themselves looked at it all admiringly. The guys started trying everything on the table and thought it was tasty and excellent. Minji said that Hayan's dad is a very good cook, to which Yunhuk looked at her incomprehensibly and didn't understand why she was being clever. The girl replied that Hayan was her friend. Yunhuk decided that Minji was a gourmet, which he immediately told the girl. Still, She shouted furiously for him not to call her that. The boy continued to tease and piss off the girl, and he was doing a great job at it while Yunha watched from the sidelines. While Yunha drank his banana juice, he thought about how delicious everything on the table was and how the guys reacted like that. The boy continued to drink his juice, and suddenly his eyes rounded with incomprehension. Yunha was puzzled because he couldn't understand what he had just drunk, but his body was already covered in a blue glow. The boy looked at his glass in surprise and realized that his mana was being restored. He could not understand how it happened. Yunha finally realized what he had poured into his glass, which surprised him even more because it was a potion. Potions are elixirs that help almost completely replenish mana in the human body. Players who fight monsters and beasts always carry this elixir since it equals their lives. Hayan saw how Yunha had shoved that glass away from him and thought he didn't like his banana juice, but the boy assured him that it was perfectly fine and delicious. Yunha asked the girl a question because he really wanted to know her dad's name, but Hayan herself thought that such a question sounded strange. The girl still decided to answer because it was not difficult for her. Her father's surname was Yang, and her name was Sokun. Yunha heard the girl's answer about her daddy's name, and the boy's eyes glistened with anticipation. The boy rushed over to Hayan and suggested they become very close friends with him. Yunha clenched his eyes and once again mentioned Hayan's father, but the boy admired him because this man had revolutionized the potions market. Yang Xiaokun has always selected the ingredients very carefully. He has the gift of filtration, which also allows him to extract the mana itself. This man would definitely become the king of the potion market in the future, and Alice Group was one of the 3 biggest companies in South Korea. Yunha had never heard of this man having a daughter before, which was incomprehensible to the boy. He finally realized the reason why he didn't know or hear anything about the man's daughter was because the girl had survived. After all, Yunha had been able to save her. Yunha touched the girl's shoulder, wanting to tell her something important. The boy told her in all seriousness that if anyone at school harassed her, she had to report it to him, and he wouldn't just let it go. The girl heard everything Yunha told her and lowered her eyes in embarrassment, but she agreed and thanked him for taking such care of her. Hayan remembered all of this, and after coming back to reality, she clasped her hands tighter and dared to tell her story in front of the class. The girl began to say that she was also from Doan kindergarten, like Yunha and Minji, and added that she liked to read and drink tea. Hayan admitted that she is still very shy when talking to new people, but she asked all the guys to talk to her. Yunha was pleased that Hayan dared to talk about herself, but he didn't expect anything from his best friend. Teacher Gina was pleased with the girl's story about herself and was sure to tell her what a good girl she was. Next, Gina informed all the guys that it was their turn to hear about another student, Jin Sona. Yunha looked at the person their teacher had indicated and was surprised to find himself staring intently at another elementary school student. The boy noticed an unusual feature on the girl, the furry ears on her head, among other things. Jin Sona stood up and lowered her eyes to the floor. The guys were paying attention, and the girl could hear them talking about her ears and tail, wondering if they were real and if she was a monster at all. The girl wasn't a monster, but she was a half-breed, and that was the name given to those people who were born with poor mana distribution. All people, when they met such half-breeds, were very wary of them, and not at all friendly, and they had their reasons. People who lost their loved ones to monsters didn't like half-breeds because they were so similar to monsters. Without raising her eyes, the girl began to talk about herself. Her name was Jin Sona, and she didn't go to kindergarten, but she would like to make friends with everyone. Yunha heard the boys discussing that some of them had been told by their parents not to go near this girl without much explanation. The boy thought that, apparently, people just had too many stereotypes. Gina had no sooner announced the name of the next student than he jumped up from his seat and introduced himself to the class. It was Cho Yunhuk, who likes to swing a sword, and thanks to his boss, is learning to control his mana. One of the boys asked, surprised, which boss he was talking about, to which Yunhuk himself only laughed, saying he didn't know who he was talking about. Yunhuk didn't hesitate any longer and pointed his finger at the person he thought was his boss. It was Yunha's disciple. He warned at once that Yunha was the most important and very strong in the class, and immediately warned the boy not to even think about anything. Yunhuk did not calm down and started shouting emotionally and loudly about his best boss in the class. At the same time, the teacher tried to calm down her student. Teacher Gina thought about the words she had just heard from Yunhuk and made a decision for herself. Gina told Jinha to stay after school and bring his parents because she needed to talk to them about something, and the boy was getting nervous because he hadn't done anything wrong. Yunha. After class, when his teacher told him to sit waiting for his parents, it was all very tiring for him. Yunhuk shouted all over the school and kept shouting that his boss was the best. But when he was sent to the teacher's room, the boy got angry and decided that from now on, training for Yunhuk would not be as easy as before. After a while in the dining hall, Yunha thought that the mana tests for the first-year students were finally over. According to the results of these tests, Yunhuk and Sona were definitely above the average level, but Hayan's mana was not even measurable. The teachers thought this was a mistake, so they also put her at the average level. Yunha thought about the fact that everything had gone without precedent, and that was the most important thing, so he could eat normally. But at this moment, his classmate Yunhuk was already calling him to his table, shouting throughout the dining hall for the captain to come to him. Yunhuk wanted to placate his captain somehow, so he said he would bring more food for them. Minji said in Yunhuk's wake that this was the third time he was coming, and that his cook would soon remember him. Still, the boy was already standing near the food distribution and didn't understand how the cook knew his name. The girl decided to be concerned and asked Yunhee if he had eaten enough, adding that she was thinking of going out and getting some more. The boy smiled and told Minji he wasn't surprised because he thought the girl was a glutton. While the guys were arguing because the girl was proving that she was not a glutton, but just took less food from the other tables, the guys started talking about who had appeared in the dining room. The same guys kept whispering that the girl did have a tail. They couldn't understand why people like that girl were allowed to enter their elementary school. The guys started talking louder and louder and asked each other not to make eye contact with that girl. Sona was walking with her tray of food among the rows and could hear what the guys were talking about very well. Sona stopped near one of the tables since the one seat behind it was unoccupied. The girls sitting at the table looked at Sona in surprise and did not understand what she did not want from them or why she stopped near them. Sona plucked up her courage and quietly asked the girls if she could sit beside them and eat lunch. One of the girls proudly held her head arrogantly and said she would not allow her to sit at their table and eat lunch beside them. The guys watching this from the sidelines annoyingly said that out of all the possibilities, Sona decided to go to the table where Sona and her company were sitting. At that moment, Sona didn't understand and asked Sona what she was thinking, who she thought she was, and what she was counting on when she approached them and wanted to sit at their table. Sona's friends supported her and advised Sonia to know her place. It was definitely not near them, and, in general, to pay attention to her appearance and what she was wearing. The girls did not hesitate to discuss Sonia's clothes, and they generally thought it would be better if she never came here and stayed where she was. Sona was very confused and embarrassed, so all she could manage was to say a few words of apology for disturbing them. Minji couldn't keep silent anymore, and angrily asked why Sona was acting like that. If she was rich, she thought she could do anything, and she didn't understand how she could be so mean. Hayan thought about how cruel that girl was. Even Yunhuk staggered at such cruelty to a strange girl and muttered the same thing to his captain. The boy pointed at the girl who couldn't bear the insults and cried while Yunha remembered something from his past life. Yunha remembered the time when he was an adult captain and destroyed monsters in his past life, and back then, he knew for sure that not all half-breeds were good. At that moment, in front of Yunha, sat one of such representatives, who told the captain that he probably thought that the poorer a man was, the further he withdrew from society, and the kinder his heart became, but only that it was not true. The half-breed added that, of course, there are good people among them, and there may even be good children, but the bad ones still outnumbered them. The man gave advice from himself to the captain that he shouldn't treat them any better simply because they were half-breeds. If he cared so much about them because of him, the man felt it should be stopped immediately. Yunha turned to ask Jin Paran why he thought he was so kind, but Paran tried to explain that he wasn't talking about that. The captain suggested that perhaps Paran thought him weak and defiantly began to draw his sword, which was already endowed with mana. Jin Paran was frightened by what he saw and tried to justify to the captain that he didn't think he was weak. Still, Yunha said that he had come to his tent in the middle of the night and was trying to harass him. Yunha clearly and confidently told the man to get out of there and that he should go to the Sentinel immediately if he still didn't want to get any from him. After some time in the Abyss Dungeon, Paran had already fought one monster and successfully defeated it. After that battle, the man breathed a sigh of relief because that monster was quite strong compared to the ones here. No sooner had Paran finally gotten away from one fight than he was already being attacked by another monster. The man still couldn't react fast enough and missed this attack. The monster that attacked the man had long tentacles with hazardous spikes. Paran saw a monster in front of him at full height, which, with its size, was intimidating. He tried his best to come to his senses, but he did not succeed. Suddenly, the captain came to the man's aid and rushed to the attack with his sword. Yunha approached Paran, intent on protecting him from the monster no matter what it cost him. The captain gathered all his strength and began to attack the monster, and he succeeded. The monster was even more enraged by this, and lunged at Yunhu with all his might, trying to reach him. Yunha reacted instantly, saving him. The man thought it was a good time to use his mana. The captain used his weapon in all his battles with monsters, and it was a sword that served him faithfully. Using the same sword, Yunhee successfully attacked the monster again. The monster tried to fight back as best he could, but fighting the strong captain was tough. Yunha concentrated on his mana and attacked the monster very strongly, and this strike was the finishing blow. The captain, having successfully finished his battle with all his might, ran to Paran, who was lying unmoving at that moment. Yunha tried to help the man, at least to save him. Paran advised the captain not to stop and to go as fast as possible, because he had already managed to get this far, and there was no time to hesitate. Yuan was already running towards the men with all her might, and the captain asked her to try to help Paran. Unfortunately, the girl could not do it because she was familiar with these wounds and no one could help. As a result, Paran would soon go to the other world. Paran was calm because he knew from the beginning what he was doing, and what the price of fighting monsters might be. The man was ready for it and didn't understand why the guys were still standing there instead of going on to fight the monsters. Yunha had to accept this whole situation and waited for Paran's last words. Paran reminded the man of their conversation when he said that not all half-breeds were kind and that they shouldn't be treated better just because they were half-breeds. The captain replied that he remembered it well. He said there might be more bad guys in the world, and the captain shouldn't ignore them because Paran himself was no different from them. Before he went to the other world, Jin Paran had one last thing to say, that he himself was not a good man. Yunha thought back to that whole situation with his comrade from the past and made a decision for himself. The boy got up from the table intending to leave, but at the last moment, he asked Minji to do something. Yunha wanted Minji to make some room at their table and went to get the person who was supposed to have that seat. He approached Sonia, but the girl didn't notice him. She was distraught and immersed in her thoughts. Yunha took the girl under his arm, led her to his friends, and told her that there was an empty seat at their table. Jin Sena and her friends saw what the boy was doing and froze in amazement watching them. Sona wanted to tell Yunhei that this was too much, so she accidentally touched his hand. The girl quickly yanked her hand, apologizing, but Yunha said it was okay and called her to his table. Yunha pointed his hand at his friends and said they had already found a place for her. Still, Yunhuk was already actively gesturing and calling the guys over to them. The girl tried to stop Yunhu because she thought it would be worse for him and his friends if they helped her. But the boy was categorical and answered that he does not care about other people's opinions and will not change his decision. The girl sitting at Sena's table watching the kids wanted to know where those kindergarten kids were from and thought they should ask for information on all of them. But Sena talked them out of it and said there was no need and it shouldn't be done. The girl was convinced that these guys made it obvious that they were nothing, and she was not interested in them. Minji greeted her new acquaintance and told the one that Yunha could be a bit stubborn sometimes, and she would have to get used to it. Yunhuk also said hello to the girl and told the one that lunch today was delicious. Hayan offered Sonia barley tea almost immediately. Still, the girl was embarrassed by the stranger's attention and care. Hayan didn't hesitate to offer her friendship to Sonia immediately. The girl was even more embarrassed by it. Sona looked at them all attentively and didn't understand why they were so kind to her. The guys carefully advised her to drink the tea slowly because it was hot but delicious. The girl with her hands around the cup of tea looked at her reflection and tried to understand what merits she deserved their kindness and care for. Sona took one gulp of the tea, which was actually very tasty. The girl started eating but was still too shy to raise her eyes. Sona choked on her food because she was eating in a hurry. Yunha carefully asked her not to hurry because no one would take her food away. And from these words, the girl could not stand it and cried. The guys tried to understand why there were tears and tried to calm the girl, but she kept crying because she was not used to such attention and care, especially from strangers. After lunch, the guys decided to go to the site together. Yunha told them all that he would be driving, and added that when he started, the guys would have to suppress mana to hide their presence. The boy also said that if someone wanted to beat him and run away, he should use mana to improve his physical abilities. Sona was worried because she didn't know how to hide her mana, so she told the boy that she knew how to hide and was in perfect shape. Minji began to encourage the girl to win with her strength, while Sona doubted that it was possible to win against him at all. Yunha realized she couldn't use telepathy, which was her ability, and decided he would teach her later. The boys started their game, and Yunha warned them they couldn't hide inside the buildings, and that they had to stay on the school grounds. Yunha turned away and started his countdown, warning all the guys that he would start after 100 seconds. The boy complied honestly, stood with his eyes closed, and kept counting to 100. Yunha finished his countdown and shouted loudly to the entire site he would search. The boy quickly found almost all the guys at once because they were upset and even a little angry. Yunha realized that only Hayan and Sona were left. Still, he couldn't feel Hayan's presence, which meant that the girl had excellent control over her mana, so he decided to find Sona first. His luck ran out as soon as he decided to look for Sona first. The boy was sure he would find a girl behind the bushes now, but his luck ended there because the girl was no longer there. Yunha could spot the girl's tail when she was about to disappear around the corner. He tried to run as fast as he could but couldn't catch up with the girl. When Yunhe's hand was about to reach the target, Sona jumped so high up that he couldn't get it. The girl said loudly and earnestly that she wouldn't lose until Yunha caught up with her, and so far, there was no way the boy could do that. The guys stood back and watched as Yunha tried to persuade the girl to immediately descend from the roof, but she stubbornly refused. Suddenly, Yunhuk, who was standing on the sidelines, decided that he had been found but caught and would resume his participation in the game. Minji didn't stand idly by. In fact, she decided that she had been tricked and was eager to run. Yuna, Yunhee's older sister, thought it was fine because she wanted to play again, and with the help of mana, she could run much faster. Yunha, seeing that the guys had decided to take part in the game once again and not admit defeat, simply became furious. The boy grabbed his head and couldn't understand what was going on, especially since he had lost control of the game. Yuna pulled himself together and decided that if that was the case, he should catch up with everyone and prove to the guys again that they were still on the losing end, just like the first time. Sona watched the situation below with a smile but remained standing on the roof. A little earlier, Hayan, who was also playing this game, had escaped into a building and was now trying to figure out where she could best hide. The girl heard Yunha shouting that he had already counted to 100 and was now going to look for them all, so she thought that she had to suppress her mana, or the boy would be able to find her quickly. Hayan tried her best to suppress her mana so that she wouldn't lose this game, or at least not so quickly. After a little while, she sort of succeeded, and then the girl remembered the rules of the game. She was not allowed to go inside, so she needed to go outside. But before the girl could get out, she suddenly saw stacks of books unknown to her on the stairs ahead. Of course, Hayan couldn't pass by because her curiosity was much stronger. She wanted to find out what this place was, and why there were so many books there. The girl walked into the room and froze in amazement. There were many books around her, and they were intriguing and mesmerizing at the same time. She walked farther into the room and couldn't get enough of what she saw around her. After picking up a few books, the girl decided that this must be her paradise because of so many. Hayan suddenly snapped out of her reverie and began to think about where she was and what this place was all about, but she didn't forget that she needed to get out of there. The girl stopped abruptly because she saw a book that she was very interested in, and she could not pass by it until she recognized its title. Suddenly, a man behind her said that the title of this book was Alice in Wonderland. The girl was a little frightened because she didn't expect to see someone else here besides her, and now she looked at the unknown grandfather with glasses. The guys who went in search of Hayan because they could not find her anywhere suddenly heard incomprehensible phrases about Alice from behind the door, so they went back and chased the rabbit. Yunha immediately went into the room because he thought the girl was in danger, but from what he saw, he could only menacingly say the girl's name, Yang Hayang. Hayan, at this time, sat on her grandfather's lap, and he read to her the book about Alice in Wonderland. Still, as soon as the girl heard her friend's voice, she immediately became nervous. Yuna said hello to the grandfather and explained that Hayan had disappeared when they were all playing a game together, so he was looking for her. However, the grandfather told the girl that she should have warned him that she was with her friends. The other guys watched the action in the doorway and tried to be quiet, but Hayan told her friend she'd forgotten. Yuna was furious at this response and didn't understand how she could just forget. The girl herself tried to apologize because she was actually ashamed of her act. He told Hayan to warn them if she wanted to leave, and the girl said she would and apologized again for her actions. Yunha thought that if he continued to scold her, she would cry, so he should stop. Yunha also apologized to his grandfather for interrupting him. His grandfather replied that it was nothing bad and that he was bored until Hayan visited him. The grandfather told the girl to revisit him because it was nice to have a friend who loved books as well, and from what Hayan heard, she was pleased. Hayan said she would visit him tomorrow because she wanted to finish reading the book she had found. Still, Yunha tried to take her home because it was already late. When the boys were leaving, Grandpa suddenly asked them to wait. Grandpa suddenly decided to offer the boys a ride home. A black premium car was already waiting outside the school and looked solid. Grandpa told all the guys that whoever wanted a ride home in this car should get in the back seat. Some guys ran to take seats in the car without thinking, while Yunha watched from the sidelines and didn't understand who this grandfather was. Yunhuk, Hayan, and Sona took their seats and talked enthusiastically about what a great car it was and how soft it was for them to sit in. Grandpa took his seat in the car and told his driver to go. Minji, Yuna, and his older sister Yuna refused Grandpa's offer to give them a ride home, so they stayed outside to watch the car drive away. Yuna thought that he had never ridden such a car before. The boy realized that at that moment, he was very jealous of his friends who had driven away in that car. There was light in the school's windows because students were in classes, but the weather was rainy and overcast outside. Yunha, on the other hand, sat at his desk and watched the rain drumming on the windowsill. The boy was distracted from his dreams by the fact that he heard his name from the teacher and would be enrolled in some candidates, but he didn't understand what it was about. Yuna looked more closely at their blackboard, on which the teacher had already written the election of the class president. Now, the boy was even more surprised. The boy could not restrain his curiosity, and so, raising his hand, he immediately asked the teacher why his name was written down. Minji, sitting next to him, said he didn't understand why his name was on the ballot. She had been told that Yunha wanted to be elected class president. The girl did not hesitate to point at the person sitting in the next row of their school class. Yunhu was smilingly looking at the one he was thinking of, and it was a very pleased Yunhuk. The boy raised his hand proudly, confirming that yes, he had recommended his captain. He was 100% sure that the captain should be president, while Yunha himself considered that Yuhuku should no longer expect mercy from him. Yunha interrupted his teacher to inform him that he was declining his candidacy and did not wish to become their class president. The boy tried to explain his refusal by saying that he didn't think he was suitable, but the teacher said that Yunhuk had already chosen him, and she didn't think he should ignore this. Teacher Gina added that all children have limitless potential. Yunha didn't know who to get back at, so he asked his roommate Minji why she hadn't told him anything about it before, except that the girl claimed that she had, and no one had asked him to throw a tantrum. The teacher informed the class that Yunha was the only presidential candidate so far and wanted to know from the other kids if anyone else wanted to volunteer this semester. Of all the kids, only one girl, Sona, responded by raising her hand, which attracted the teacher's attention. Yunha and the guys carefully watched what Sona was doing and were surprised. Sona looked back, looked directly at the guys, and said she wanted to run for office. Yunha was looking at her warily and sensed that the girl was already up to something. In a big box, a lot of burgers attracted the attention of all the guys. Sona informed all the guys they could dismantle and added that her dad bought all those burgers. All the guys were happily piling on the treats and happy to have burgers for lunch today while repeating how great Sona was and that she was the best. Sona's girlfriends handed out treats to all the kids and told everyone that Sona said if she was president, she would buy them all burgers once a month, so the girls advised them to choose Sona. Yunha and his friends were watching it all from the sidelines, and none were hurrying to run out and treat themselves. Suddenly, one of Yunha's classmates still held out a burger, but the boy didn't react in any way. That classmate was Sona herself, and she wanted to give Yunhu a treat because she noticed that the boy kept staying out of it all. On every burger package that the girl handed out, it was written that she was thankful for every precious vote, which was a marketing move. Yunha, however, was not going to give in to such publicity and simply replied that he didn't want and wouldn't eat that burger. The boy decided he wasn't enjoying this interaction, so he turned and walked away from the girl. Yunha heard Sona continue to promise the boys something in return if she became president. He was surprised that she was still a child, but she was already behaving like that. Yunhuk was also not left out. He was handed a burger, and the boy looked at it all with big round eyes as if it were something scary. Yunhuk resisted and didn't take the treat, like all of Yunhe's friends who refused the burgers. Yunha watched his friends and was proud that they were friends who didn't give in but stood tall with their heads held high. The boy looked once again at the whole situation and decided, well, let it be so. It was warm spring weather outside, and the entire elementary school was heading outdoors. The kids gathered in front of their teacher and were ready to go on their spring field trip. Gina tried to shout to all the kids and let them know that she was about to do a roll call, and when she called out a name, that person should raise their hand. The teacher asked her president and vice president for help speeding up the roll call of all the children. The teacher's first name was Ji Sena, and she was the president of class number 4. The next one was Vice President Yunha, also a 4th grade student. But the fact that he held a position below Sena did not please the boy at all. The teacher continued onward with a roll call among all of her students. The children thoroughly enjoyed following their teacher Gina on the hike. Gina enjoyed telling her students about the different sights that came their way. After a short walk, it was time for lunch, so they broke into small groups, spread out their plaids, and started eating the food they had brought with them from home. Yunha opened his lunchbox and was surprised to see that "I love you" was written on top with ketchup. That was the message his older sister Yunha had left him. When the girls in his class read what was written on his lunch, they exclaimed that it was wonderful and looked very appetizing, while the boy wondered when Yunha had time to write it. Minji couldn't keep silent either and said that such an act from his sister, who loved him, was very nice. Yunha asked the girl to show him what kind of dinner she was having. Yunha, inside Minji's lunchbox, saw neatly stacked and delicious foods. Hayan showed her lunch to the girls, and in response, they did not keep silent because they thought it was terrific. She had a whole work of art in her lunchbox, especially cute, a teddy bear made out of food. Yunha remembered Hayan's dad as the one who loved and could create masterpieces in the kitchen and thought everything was predictable. Still, Yunhuk interrupted everyone and decided to loudly announce that for him, a bowl of noodles was the best food for the excursion. The guys were surprised at Yunhuk's words, what kind of bowl of noodles he was talking about, and if he hadn't collected anything for himself. Yunhuk told the guys that he didn't pack anything for himself, because his mom told him that noodles were the best food for the excursion. The guys looked at Yunhuk doubtfully and didn't know what to say or if they should answer him. Minji felt sorry for Yunhuk, that his mother didn't pack him lunch. Still, Yunha supported his friend and added that he agreed with him because noodles were the best. Yunha thought he would have to reduce the amount of hard training. In the forest, a frightened man tried to escape from those chasing him. As he ran off, trying to find a place to hide, he thought about what was chasing him. He couldn't understand where the monsters came from in this area, and because he wasn't paying attention, he caught his foot on a stick. The man tried to keep his balance, but could not, so he fell to the ground, hitting the ground hard. He tried to get up, but the blow was so decisive that he could only crawl because the desire to survive was stronger. In front of him, a moment later, he saw the monster's big, furry, black paw. The man was stared at by giant wolf-like creatures with red glowing eyes and jaws full of sharp teeth. The man looked closer and was even more frightened because the 7th grade monsters in front of him were called hounds. He tried to call for help, but it was useless, and a 6th grade hellhound was already looming over him. The man realized that saving himself seemed increasingly unrealistic, and he did not know what to do next. The hounds didn't hesitate any longer and pounced on the man in a matter of minutes to take him down and destroy him, which they eventually succeeded in doing. The monster leader's jaws were coal black, and his fangs could take out anything without sparing anyone. He wanted to subdue everyone, so he gave them a mental command to stop where they were and wait for further orders. The entire pack obeyed their leader, and their bodies were simultaneously engulfed in a blue glow. All the riders froze in place at attention, waited for their ringleader's next order, and prepared to comply. The ringleader mentally told all the racers that they were now allowed to run after him to further their goal. The Hell Racers were running at a rapid pace, trying to reach their goal in the south as quickly as possible. At this time, Yunha and his companions were laughing, remembering different stories, devouring each of their meals, and suspecting nothing. All the guys had previously pulled out clue papers. They started looking for surprises all over the area, and Yunhe's friends would do the same. His companions were not very lucky because their papers were empty, and the boy did not give them any importance, considering this occupation was not the best. Yunhuk, when he heard that some of the boys had managed to find what was hidden, decided that he too was obliged to find the treasure. At that moment, his captain tried to calm him down and explained that Yunhuk was no pirate to look for treasure. Minji was also already involved, as the girl's sporting interest had kicked in, and she didn't like to lose. The girls, Hayan and Sona, also wanted to get to work on finding their treasure as soon as possible. But only one, Yunha, categorically didn't want to participate and was going to leave. Minji prevented the boy's escape and stopped him, saying he had to go with them too. The boys were busy looking for something to do, and only Yunha was thinking about how much he wanted to go home because this was no longer a picnic but a hike. Yunha figured it would be better to go to Kenboken Palace, which was much closer. Yunhu was flooded with memories that brought him little joy because the Yijongbu area was just beyond this mountain. All the guys suddenly stopped because they heard an incomprehensible rustle near them. Sona froze fearfully, not knowing what it was, and Minji experienced the same emotions. Yuna interrupted the girls' whispering and listened more closely, trying to understand what had made them all so wary. The noise made by the monster's huge paws along the road was exactly what caused the noise heard by all the guys. Hayan saw something ahead that she hadn't expected and wasn't prepared for, and it scared the girl very much. A monster with red glowing eyes emerged from behind the trees and headed toward the boys. The monster looked very intimidating with its fangs and claws on its paws. Yunha was very angry when he saw who was coming at them and remembered an event in his past life. It was the incident of seeing the flowers on Mount Bukan when Seoul was protected by the cocoon. The monsters that flooded Yijongbu somehow managed to break through the cocoon and head south, and it was a tragic accident with many casualties. The guys were in great danger because they were the same monsters who were ruthless and very strong. The monster's mouth was full of sharp teeth from which saliva flowed, and the creature's gaze was insane. Minji froze horror in her eyes. She could not even move because the fear paralyzed her, and she did not know what to do. The monster didn't hesitate any longer, and jumped up to attack and destroy everyone he saw before him. Minji caught on something, and unable to keep her balance, she fell to the ground and now looked even more defenseless. The monster was almost at its target and separated from the girl in mere seconds. Minji already thought that she was about to go to the other side of the world. She closed her eyes tightly and covered her hand to try to delay the moment at least a little. Yuna came to the girl's aid, attacked the monster at the last moment, and knocked it down with his foot. The boy's strong punch knocked down and felled the monster, which was very unexpected for the monster itself. Yunha activated his mana to attack the monster, and was immediately entirely enveloped by the blue glow. The boy was going to attack with his weapon, and the first thing that came to hand was his lunchbox fork. Yunha was focused and ruthless. He wanted to deal with the monster as quickly as possible before it could harm any of his comrades. They watched their friend's actions and were surprised because they didn't expect Yunha to be able to do such a thing. Yunha had managed to slay the monster and send it to the other world, and now stood watching as the fire engulfed the monster whole. The boy, without even turning to face Minji, asked if she was all right. The girl, though shocked, answered him that she was fine thanks to his help and further actions. Yunhuk turned to his captain, thinking it would be more appropriate to ask him about it. Still, when Yunhee asked him what he wanted to know, the boy answered honestly that he didn't know how to put it into words. The boy was worried about his friend because it wasn't the same captain he knew, and that's precisely what Yunhuk spouted. Yunha realized that his friend had noticed the changes that had happened to him because of his emotions and memories. However, he still tried to assure him that he was fine, just a little nervous. He knew that when he destroyed monsters, he would become an invincible player who hated monsters and ended his mind in battle with them. Yunha knew he shouldn't have shown his comrade this side of himself, but controlling himself at times like this is very difficult and almost impossible. The boy decided that he would make more efforts in the future to make this sight less brightly visible and noticeable to others. Yunhuk asked his captain what they should do now, but Yunha, who was ahead of Minji, said it was not worth asking because they should run away as soon as possible. Yunha agreed with that. The boy knew very well that hounds always travel in packs. There were too many coming down from the mountains, and he would most likely not be able to save all of them, so there was only one way left. Yunha couldn't find any other way out, so he finally decided for himself and asked the guys to listen to him. The boy stressed very strongly that they should listen to him very carefully, for their survival depended on it. At this time, the students in their class unsuspectingly continued to search further for their hidden treasure. Spreading his napkin on a rock, one of the students decided to take a break in this spot. Sona made herself comfortable on her napkin and told her boys to go and look for the treasure. The boys were not very happy with this instruction. The guys thought it was too much and wanted to rest beside the Sen. The girl looked very contemptuous, promising them nothing good if they didn't start doing what she told them to do right now. The guys only had to take one look at their class president, who was clear without words. They immediately changed their minds, and leaving her alone, they ran to find the treasure. Sona was relaxing, sitting in the sun and flipping through her cell phone, thus amusing herself. The girl was suddenly distracted from her study because she heard a foreign noise outside. The boys ran away, their eyes frozen in horror, as fast as they could without sparing their strength. Sona was very surprised by all this and felt uncomfortable because she didn't understand what was happening. A whole pack of hounds raced after the boys, and the scraping of their claws against the ground was drowned out by the shouts that all the students raised. The girl ran past Sona and only managed to yell out that there were monsters chasing them. From what she heard, she dropped her phone. One of the hounds was focused on Senya and intended to destroy the girl without hesitation. Sona begged for someone to come to her aid, but the monster was almost there. The girl kept calling for help and was more frightened than ever, but the monster only opened its mouth wider. Sona had no hope of being saved, and because she could no longer look at the monster in front of her, she closed her eyes tightly. At the last moment, a shot was fired at the monster, and the bullet that hit it saved the girl. The monster was destroyed, but the girl could not recover from the stress. Sona remained seated and was even afraid to raise her head while the monster lay motionless beside her. The girl heard someone addressing her, and it was someone she didn't expect to see, but he still helped and saved her. Yunha was her savior, and the boy told Sona that if she didn't want to go to the other world, she should go downstairs immediately. Sona still didn't understand what was happening or what the boy was telling her, and Yunha continued to say that he had cleared the path and that she could go. Yunha cleared the way for all the guys by mercilessly destroying the monsters. The girl grabbed Yunhee's hand at the last moment when she realized he was going to leave and tearfully began to say that she couldn't just leave and had to stay and protect her. Sona held Yunhu tightly and would not let him go under any circumstances, realizing that she would be safer with him. Yunha let the girl's tantrums, and even at times like this, her commanding tone passed his ears and said only one thing to Sona: do not dare stand in his way. The boy decided to explain again, but for this, Sona needed to listen to him very carefully. While telling everything, he remembered how he had already told his friends about it. Yunha told them to run to the foot of the mountain. If they met anyone on the way, they should be sure to ask to call the players. Then Yunhuk was sure that his captain would go along with everyone. The boy replied that they would go on their own, and he would go to find the others. Yunhuk immediately decided to be with the captain, because he was learning to control his mana and could help Yunha. Yunha interrupted his speech and sternly told him to stop talking about everything and concentrate on saving himself and surviving. Yunhuk obediently agreed and, lowering his head, apologized to the captain for his emotions. Yunha informed the boys that they were on the team from now on, and they needed to remember that the hounds have very good cores. The boy muttered some more, saying they needed to suppress their mana as much as possible. After talking to the boys and giving them very important advice and instructions, Yunha went into the forest. The boy scattered food from Hayan's lunchbox, knowing full well that some mana was left in that food thanks to her father. But Yunha remembered that hounds have a special sense of smell, and so they can smell mana well. This comes in handy for distractions. At this point, the hounds, on the other hand, were wandering around the forest, trying to smell their targets and determine which direction to take. Yunha finished scattering the food and used his abilities to find out where they were. Using his mana, the radius spread out over a great distance to determine an approximate location. The boy was pleased that he had managed to buy some time for his fleeing companions. Yunha used his strength to move through the forest with long-range jumps, giving him considerable acceleration. The boy stopped because he saw a black cloud in front of the mountain and realized that it would not be easy because of so many monsters. Yunha reflected on the fact that he now had half as much mana as before he returned. The good news was that he had Yuzu tea, but it would have to be saved. The boy suddenly heard hounds barking and growling in the distance, and realized that he was already close to the monster's location. In the clearing, monsters were attacking the men, and one of the men was begging hard for help. The monster's jaws were so close that the man had no chance to escape, but he continued to scream for help. The hound's mouth was full of sharp fangs and saliva continuously dripped. The hounds were strong monsters and hardy, and their torso was made up of solid muscles. The monsters were suddenly attacked from the back by Yunha, who still managed to reach them. The boy rushed to the man's aid but did not have time. He had already been sent to the other world, and now Yunha was surrounded on all sides by monsters, but with one, he managed to get even. Yunha turned his attention to something he thought he would definitely need shortly. The boy turned his attention to the man who had been destroyed by the monsters and thought that, since he was a player, he must have a weapon. Yunha did not take the player's longsword because it would be too heavy for him, but he saw a small dagger that was just right. The boy assumed that this metal contained mana and hoped that it did, as he would then be able to destroy the hounds. Yunha wanted to fight the monsters with the remaining mana in the dagger's metal to avoid using his own. The boy, with a cheeky smile on his face, beckoned to the monsters, but his weapon was already aimed at them. Enraged by this call, the hounds could not delay any longer and rushed at the boy, wanting to destroy him as soon as possible. One of the monsters made a leap and was almost at the target, and its saliva from its mouth from anger was flying in different directions. Yunha held the weapon firmly and engaged his strength to repel this attack. The boy could reflect and attack himself successfully, because with one blow the monster was already destroyed. The monster was engulfed in flames, and the others were already chasing it with their paws, wanting to kill Yunha. Yunha was so engrossed in massacring one monster that he only noticed the others at the last moment. The boy managed to react in time and rush into the fight. With his weapon, he managed to walk over all the hounds, striking them. Because the monsters were outnumbered by time, one of them almost managed to pounce on Yunhu from behind. The boy could duck in time to avoid the attack, and the monster was almost on top of him. Yunha tried not to waste seconds, turning around to strike with the dagger he had taken from the player. A pack of these hounds barked and growled, and ran at Yunhu at full speed while he was already ready to give a proper fight back. Yunha touched the ground with his hand and was about to do something that could make him a little safer, because the pack of hundreds running at him was big. Using his strength, the boy could push himself off the ground and jump up. The monsters looked at the one who could jump so high, and were surprised that they opened their mouths. Yunha wanted to use something, so he used a small dagger. The boy succeeded and scattered tiny needles over the monsters, which were hard to hide from. The sharp needles reached their targets, and the monsters were attacked one after another. The boy was already on the ground, and almost everything around him was already engulfed in fire, and monsters were blazing, which meant that his plan had succeeded. Many hounds were covered in a blue glow, because Yunha continued to use the mana that remained in the player's dagger. On the battlefield, there was a pillar of blue glow, as Yunha didn't give the monsters even a moment to recover, and continued to attack repeatedly. The boy was acting according to his clearly formed plan, and would destroy absolutely everyone in this clearing. Yunha got his way, and all the hounds there were destroyed. From the noise of the battle that was taking place in that clearing, all the birds flew up into the sky, even though they were frightened by what was happening below on the ground. Yunha returned from his memories as he cleared the road of monsters to Senya, who stood motionless. At her feet, the hound the boy had destroyed was already blazing. The girl still didn't want him to leave her alone. The boy once again said what he advised the girl to do next. He had to go to the person he had noticed on the road, and obviously, this person needed his help because he was already in very bad condition. Yunha said one last Sena, and he went. Using his strength and his jumps, he had already practically disappeared from the horizon after a moment. The girl watching all this, and slowly realizing everything that had happened here, suddenly realized what she wanted. Sena wanted to get someone who was strong and brave, and Yunha was exactly that. The boy was already running as fast as he could, trying to get to those who needed his help as quickly as possible. Yunha ran into the thick forest and thought only that he was obligated to destroy all these monsters. He ran to the ground and used his strength to leap above the trees, scaring all the birds sitting on their branches. After a little while, he found what he was looking for and was determined. Yunha saw a huge pack of monsters below, and leading them all was a 6th-grade monster hellhound. The hellhound was large, and its head was distinguished from the torso by bright red hues that separated it visually from all the others. From the hellhound's mouth, a blob of black smoke practically covered the boy entirely. Yunhei didn't care about the monster's actions because he thought that letting the monster tag him as much as it wanted wouldn't change anything. The boy was confident and knew no matter what, he would destroy the monster under any circumstances. Yunha repeated the maneuver he had used earlier, and again used his needles, which had crumbled everywhere. The monsters tried to run away to escape from this attack, but they couldn't do so. All of them were under this attack, and there was no mercy for anyone, just what Yunha wanted. Yunha jumped to the ground, ready for further battle. Just from his one look, one could tell that he had no intention of retreating. The boy looked at the pack in front of him, and that hellhound stood a little farther away on the dais. She was the one who gave the mental command to take, and it was meant for all hounds. Towering over the boy were 2 monsters who were going to fulfill their leader's order, and destroy Yunhu as soon as possible. Yunha wasn't going to give up, and he had successfully launched a counterattack himself, not feeling kindly towards the monsters. The boy was still armed and deftly handled these weapons, and these weapons had saved him many times before. He was destroying the undead one by one and wouldn't stop until he sent the last monster to the other side. Yunha paused to assess the situation around him, and to his dismay, there were many more hounds. The boy had to fight off several monsters simultaneously. The small dagger still had mana, which helped Yunhu and increased his chances of winning. The boy fought on instinct and was very good, so the monsters did not have it easy. Almost the entire clearing was already on fire because Yunhee had managed to kill many hounds. The monsters didn't back down, and were going to fight until the very end, so Yunha thought they were stubborn creatures. Yunhee's friends ran through the forest to escape the monsters attacking their school class. The boys recalled Yunhee's words, who hoped that his comrades knew exactly what they had to do. Because the hounds had very good cores, the boy told them to suppress their mana as much as possible. All the boys then listened very attentively to their friend's advice and instructions and were going to carry out everything unquestioningly. They ran as hard as they could without stopping for even a moment's rest, for their safety depended on it. When they reached the nearest fork in the forest, they had to stop and decide which way to take. Yunhuk hoped to get the answer to their question of where they should run next from Hayan. Hayan was almost out of energy because she was tired from the rush. Still, she tried to pull herself together because she had to, and her inaction could hurt her friends. The girl remembered Yunhee's instructions that she and Sona would be the navigators for their company. Still, Hayan would be the main navigator since she had excellent senses, and Sona would just help her. Hayan knew that she had to do it because the whole company would follow her lead, and she couldn't afford to be wrong. As quickly as possible, the girl gathered her thoughts and said something terrible was behind the left turn. Hayan also told Sona that she had well-developed senses, so if there were monsters nearby, she would notice them too. Sona confirmed that the place Hayan was pointing to was filled with sounds that didn't bode well. Minji decided to take a little control of the situation, so she told all the guys that they were tired but had to pick themselves up and move on. Yunhuk followed all his captain's instructions and obeyed the girls, but only one question constantly plagued him. The boy could not understand why there were no players in the area, and after a moment he stopped because he heard strange sounds. At that moment, the girl firmly grasped the boy's hand, preventing him from doing anything. Minji was the girl who held Yunhuk's hand tightly and told him not to look back in any way, but to just keep running. The girl hadn't forgotten her friend's instruction because Yunha had instructed her to ensure the guys didn't panic. She tried in her own manner to resent that Yunha was advising her only, but he was adamant and replied that yes, only that, but it was very important. Minji didn't dare disobey because, no matter what, she trusted Yunhei and knew that he wouldn't advise anything bad. Hayan and Sona suddenly stopped because they saw a large blob of black energy before them. The girl stopped the other guys too and informed everyone that something was ahead of them, and it was definitely not good. All the guys froze and did not understand what to do next as the black clot approached them more and more. From beneath this clot, the creature's massive paw with long claws became visible to them. The guys could then see a muscular torso of large size with sharp spikes covering the entire back of this monster. The guys were very scared, could not even move, and still did not understand what they should do now. In front of them stood a real hound, and none of the boys knew how they could survive and save themselves now. The hound reached its full height and howled loudly, which didn't bode well either. Yunhuk, with his stick in his hand, froze in horror and tried to figure out what this hound was doing. The boy later realized why the monster was howling like that. It was because the monster was just calling his pack to him. The guys were trapped because the monsters were now everywhere and were coming at them. Before their escape, Yunhuk remembered the admonition of his captain, who said he was the only one who could fight, and added that he was the strongest of them, so he would be able to protect them. The boy remembered all those words and tried to gather his courage and strength because he knew perfectly well that it was not worth waiting for help. Yunhuk then heard that he would have to fight the monsters they encountered, no matter how much he wanted to. Hitting his hands meant that Yunhuk understood everything and would do whatever was required of him. Taking his stick, which would soon be his trusty weapon, the boy inhaled deeply and exhaled, trying to focus. He hoped and wanted to believe that he could, yet he remembered all the training with his captain and how, time after time, he repeated all the moves until Yunha was satisfied with him. Yunhuk activated his mana and stood before his enemy, preparing to engage in this fight. The boy no longer hesitated and swung his weapon at the monster with all his might. He still managed to hit the hound that was closest to the others. All the monsters froze with surprise because they did not expect such a leap from the boy, and now they were more careful. Yunhuk was very happy that he had succeeded because he had little faith in his strength. Thanks to the boy's efforts, one of the hounds had one eye damaged, but the others were even more angry. At the boy at full speed were two monsters who wanted to send him to the other world as soon as possible. Yunhuk was not thinking of retreating and giving up. He was going to take this battle and try to survive and win. As the monsters attacked, one of them managed to snag the boy, but it was as if he felt nothing and continued to fight on with all his might. The other monsters no longer stood aside, and all rushed into the very epicenter of the battle together. It was getting harder and harder for the boy to keep up, and his strength was running out, but he tried his best and did everything the captain taught him. The girls shrank from fear and sat aside as they suddenly saw that their friend was wounded, and from this they were frightened even more. Sona saw all the horror happening to her comrade, and it felt like those monsters were just playing with Yunhuk. The girls heard the boy talking to himself, saying he would not give up and would fight to the very end. There were many hounds, and they all ran at the boy to destroy him and then get to the rest of the guys. Yunhuk summoned his mana and tried to put all his power into the blow meant for the monster. The hound decided to attack Yunhuk, but it was practically on target. They were only a short distance apart. An incredibly powerful blow was delivered to the monster, and one boy did it all through sheer persistence. The boy himself was shocked at what he had just been able to do and couldn't believe it until the end. Yunhuk was beginning to think that this was a bit like some boss's ability. The boy missed one of the monsters, failed to react in time, and was attacked by it. The hound's strike brought the boy to the ground, and she didn't plan on stopping there. Yunhuk was wounded, and on top of that, the monster had pinned him to the ground with its mighty paw. The monster opened its mouth with sharp teeth and would destroy its enemy. The girls were horrified at what was happening to their friend, and tried to find ways to help him. Sona was so shocked and frightened that she couldn't even move, and memories flashed before her eyes one by one. The girl remembered all their happy moments with her friend Yunhuk, who was always by her side. Sona tried to call for help so that someone would come to them, and this horror would end. She remembered all those moments that had happened to them, and couldn't believe it would end like this. On the other hand, the monster never gave up on his goal at this moment and had no intention of sparing anyone. The girls couldn't look at it anymore and rushed to their friend's aid, summoning all their strength. Sona, from wanting to help Yunhuk badly, was engulfed in fire and tried her best to change something. The radius of her power spread farther, and the girl couldn't stop saying that at least someone would come to their aid now. The monsters felt a strong wind suddenly blow around them, which puzzled them so much that they froze. All the monsters swirled in a strong vortex that swept away one by one, leaving only the guys untouched. The girls didn't understand the whirlwinds either, but for some reason they were sure they wouldn't hurt them. Hayan looked around in amazement and tried to figure out what it was and if they should be wary of it. The girls, despite all the whirlwinds that were growing bigger and bigger, rushed to their comrade to find out how he was and if he needed help. Yunhuk, despite all his injuries, the first thing he did was apologize to the girls for having to see all of this and for being scared. The guys were distracted by what they saw a moment later, and it was a girl coming straight down from above them. The girl approached the guys, but they could not relax and realize if she was a threat, so they huddled closer together. In front of the guys stood a girl from the 12 Thrones who possessed divine wind. Her name was Shin Soyeon. She asked the guys to close their eyes for a second. Soyeon promised them that now these monsters would get what they deserved and would regret coming here. Yunha, on the other hand, was still fighting alone with the entire pack of hounds, and now only a tiny ring of fire separated him from the monsters. The boy had a little time to recover and got a thermos from his backpack, which was filled with Michele's potion. Yunha decided that if he was still here, he should drink it because there might not be a better time. In seconds, the boy finished his potion and picked up where he left off. Yunha, having gained strength from that potion, was ready to fight more than ever and was confident that he would soon deal with all the monsters. The boy concentrated on exerting his power and activated the heavenly walk. Yunhe's blows were powerful, and all the monsters flew away from him as soon as they approached the boy. The monsters were still raring to fight. They all rushed at the boy, and they had only one goal: to get rid of him as soon as possible. Yunha was collected and delivered his blows one by one until no one left could threaten his safety and all the other people. The boy in this battle actively used his weapon, which helped him greatly, but the struggle did not end. Yunha involved the dagger and the gun, and the hounds could not deal with him. The boy had no sooner destroyed one monster than dozens of other monsters swooped down on him from behind. He applied his mana, and at times like this, the boy could think of nothing but getting to the last one. Yunha was ruthless in principle like all hounds, for they were very similar. It was not easy for the boy because this battle required a lot of energy and strength from him. Yunha was able to deal with all the monsters that came his way, and now there was only one left on the battlefield, their leader. He gathered all his remaining strength and used the heavenly action, hoping it would help him win the victory. The boy's entire body was engulfed in a blue glow, and Yunha was well aware that he might be unable to make a second attempt. The boy felt his strength leaving him because he had already spent more than he could count on. It wasn't easy for the monster either, but like Yunha, he wasn't ready to give up and retreat, so he went to the end. Yunha attacked the monster with his dagger, which hit it right in the mouth. The boy followed without wasting a second and pulled the trigger on the gun. Unfortunately, Yunha saw that this was not the end, and defeating the ringleader was much harder than he had anticipated. Everything around them was already engulfed in fire. Still, no one was retreating, and this moment of their battle was agitated for both of them. It was difficult to see anything in this vortex of fire and constant attacks from the side, but the battle did not stop. Yunha was still focused and attentive to every detail, even though it was already difficult for him. He did not stop momentarily to use his weapon on the monster. The monster was getting numerically wounded, but because the pack leader was very strong, he continued to stay on all his paws. Yunha, in another fall, could barely get his dagger on the ground to keep from falling and continue to hold his opponent's gaze. The boy realized he had no more ammunition and was left to use only close combat. Yunha also realized that his mana was already almost at 0, but he was glad that the monster had it as well, so it was fine. The odds were even. Despite being attacked many times, the monster still had a very intimidating appearance. The monster thought the boy was an overconfident human and began launching large black clots of his energy at Yunhu. Yunha turned to the monster with a sneer, wanting to know if it had any strength left for another attack. The boy noticed what the monster was releasing and at first thought it was a mark. However, looking closer, he realized that the monster had begun to thicken the fog before attacking. The monster wanted only one thing: to get this boy to the other side of the world. Yunha was no longer standing still and pondering. He was already rushing to meet his opponent. The boy began to apply the rest of his mana and used his dagger to throw an attack, hoping it would be the final one. Yunha above him couldn't see anything. There was only a large black blob around him. The boy was trying to figure out what it was and, for reassurance, held his breath for a moment, thinking maybe it was some kind of poison, but then realized it wasn't. Yunha decided that if it wasn't poison, he shouldn't delay any longer and just get it over with. The boy acted only on instinct and even now realized it was madness. Despite the best efforts of the monster who was releasing fire, he continued to burst through him. Yunha saw nothing around him and walked forward towards his goal. He suddenly realized that his mana was gone, that he had completely used up all of it. The boy had struggled to survive the fall, but could only hope now. Yunha fell to the ground, breathing heavily. All his clothes were smoldering from the fire that the monster had released. After recovering a bit, Yunha realized that despite the large amount of mana he had spent on his defense, he was still severely injured. Yunha leaned on his knees on his weapon and suddenly remembered a moment from his past life. The boy remembered being the captain of his team. In one of the battles with monsters, he was also without strength and could only hold on to his enthusiasm. That captain was then bent down on his knees when many different monsters stood before him. Someone was rushing to his aid, but one of his comrades stopped him and told him not to touch him. That comrade said the captain's name was Berserk for a reason, and he didn't need anyone's help. I added that the meaning of the name Berserk is that the gift is activated only in a critical situation. The same thing happened with Yunha now. His gift and ability were only activated when the situation reached a critical point. The monster could not have expected this, so it froze, trying to understand what it was doing to its opponent. Yunha came to his senses, was no longer defenseless, and decided that now was the final point of their battle, and the monster would no longer be able to escape. He attacked without sparing, and with one of his punches, Yunhei managed to reach the hound. The boy didn't stop using his gift and leaped with his blade to attack the monster. Yunha tried to pierce the black cloud of fog behind the monster with his punch. The boy failed to land his blow, and this blob turned into a giant ball, and the monster was inside it. Yunha, looking at this transformation, decided that the monster was thus hiding from him. He glanced at his dagger, which he had decided to continue to use in this battle, thinking that this blob of mist was not so strong that he could break through it. The boy used his gift and decided to remind the monster of his earlier words that he would not be able to survive under any circumstances. Yunha was literally blasting his way through with his weapons and his strength. The boy repeated his promise that the monster was about to go to the other world, no matter how hard he tried to hide from it. Yunha could get to the hound and would finally do what he had wanted to do all along. He put all his strength into attacking the monster one last time. There was no more chance for it to survive. Yunha finally won the victory, even though it was not easy for him, and the monster was already engulfed in fire. The boy sat exhaustedly on the ground and watched as everything blazed. He managed to get his way no matter what. Yunha watched the sunset in the distance outside the city and was glad it was finally over. He didn't need to be strong anymore and could exhale from so much expended energy he just passed out. At the same time, the events with Yunhee's comrades occurred on another battlefield where one of the 12 thrones, Shin Soyun, came to their aid. The girl would not spare them to deal with all the monsters surrounding the guys. The guys were shocked by her appearance and Soyun's abilities. The girl was very strong, and the fan she always held in her hands was endowed with special powers. She remembered for a moment how, in the distant past, when running away from the hounds, she had thought about why those people couldn't just do their jobs to avoid such consequences. Soyun didn't wait any longer, and used her mana to reveal her fan, which was already covered in a blue glow. Using her gift, the girl could summon large vortices that absorbed everything in the area. Managing and fully controlling all the vortices that had formed, the girl wondered why no one had reported what was happening there. The girl pointed her finger at all the monsters and said with a creepy smile that they had all come to pay, and no one would be able to survive. Large funnels absorbed one monster after another, and only the guys sitting on the sidelines were untouched. Soyeon spared no one and sent all the monsters to the other world, and the girl did it all very quickly. The girl was endowed with a special power against which it was basically impossible to resist. Finishing her work perfectly, the girl closed her fan with a light movement. Soyeon was so engrossed in the massacre of monsters that she even forgot about the existence of children around. The girl coming down on her little whirlwind looked simply amazing. Soyeon apologized to the guys for being so engrossed in their actions that she greatly forgot about them and frightened them. The girl reassured the boys not to cry and explained that they were no longer in danger. Yunhuk interrupted Soyeon, who was so enraptured by her that he couldn't hold back any longer and decided to say it aloud. The guys were so amazed that after a moment, no one could hold back anymore. Interrupting each other, the guys shouted how cool the girl was. Yunhuk wanted to know if Soyeon was part of the 12 thrones, and Minji was trying to tell him that he should have been thankful for saving them in the first place. The boy was so amazed that he could personally meet one of the best players that he could not wholly control himself and his emotions. The girl carefully watched all the guys and decided they must have lost their minds a little because of fear because they all looked terrible. Soyeon immediately checked them all for internal wounds and used her abilities. What the girl saw in Hayan shocked her because there was a lot of mana around her. Hayan, from such attention that was showered on her after a moment, was very surprised.